Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina, and today with me, I have two wonderful, wonderful guests. We're going to be talking all about gray boxing and rapid level drafting today. And before we do that, we're going to go through and introduce our wonderful guests. Most of you are probably familiar with both of them, but I am going to force both of you through the arduous process of explaining who you are to us anyway. So, Jessica, let's go ahead and start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica. I am a technical writer here at Epic. Been here for about 4 years, writing for world building tools and art pipeline stuff. You may be thinking to yourself, why then is she here talking about level design? Well, those tools dovetail very well into level design, and level design has always kind of been a hobby of mine. If you follow me on Twitter, I have a lot of level design tutorials that I am working on or that are up there and on the dev site that you can check out, and I am super excited to be here today.
Very excited to have you here today. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, we have Dan here. Dan, for those who are unaware of who you are, can you please give us a quick description of your visage? This is the word I'm going to land on.
Visage. I was not prepared to do this. All right. My name is Dan Hutnick. I am the live stream operator here for the Inside Unreal stuff, and I've been a lifelong environment artist. So when Tina said that this was happening, I said, yes, please. And so I'm here to come on because it's something I'm really passionate about. I think that there's way too much that we could talk about, and we only have a couple hours, so we're going to try to focus solely on gray boxing, but there's going to be a lot of tangential stuff, and this all ties in. I mean, it is the bedrock for your games, your environments, pretty much everything. So it's something that's good to pay attention to because I think a lot of people maybe don't give it enough credit or aren't as interested in it, and I can get that. It's kind of the boring part for some people because it's simply you're making some gray boxes and stuff like that, but it is the foundation, and if you don't get it right, you're building on a bad foundation, and then you can only polish something so much. Yeah. if you will.
Absolutely. Completely understand. And then for any of you who are unfamiliar with me as well, my name is Tina. I am, of course, your host for the show, but I also have a background in environment art. I was a lead artist for quite a while there before I eventually went into education, where I was teaching other folks how they could do environment art. And now I'm here as your lovely Unreal Engine community manager, and there's nowhere else I would rather be. But there's a lot of things that I've learned along the way that I think would be particularly helpful to people either starting out on their journey or maybe just need a little bit of help getting out of their own heads and into the engine and actually getting into the process of building the thing. Because I myself am one of those people that took quite a while where I felt like if I didn't have a perfect plan or an exact plan of action, that I couldn't even get into the engine yet. I needed to have everything set up beforehand, but that's just not how things work, especially in an actual live game building environment. So that's going to be the main stuff we're going to talk about today, is just in general gray boxing and level drafting and these first initial stages of things.
And I think that's something important to hit on too, real quick, is the educational background for all three of us, which is a weird serendipitous thing that
weird coincidence.
Yeah, I didn't really consider until we were all sitting here. But yeah, we have a lot of passion for this, and what we're kind of hoping to do here, at least, is maybe bestow some of the knowledge, some of the trial and error that we went through, so that way you can jump in and be more successful more immediately. No matter what we tell you here, no matter what anybody tells you anywhere, you can only learn so much from being told. There is so much of the in doing that is important. It is one of those really frustrating things that I even honestly find pretty frustrating as someone who's working on new endeavors that I'm having the exact same issue with, where like you can follow a million tutorials, you can read a million books, you can watch a million GDCs, but until you get in there and start doing, there's going to be there's roadblocks that you just won't knock down just from hearing. So we're trying to give you as many as that we can. We also want to encourage you to use this as maybe an opportunity to also, if you haven't done a lot of gray boxing, jump in, have fun with it. What we're going to be doing here today is some really rapid prototyping. I mean, there's three of us, we have 2 hours, and three of us are trying to make an environment. So we're getting about 30 minutes apiece. That is nothing. We are speed painting or speed sketch, drawing these environments, and that can actually be a really good exercise for you to kind of do exactly what Tina said, which is break down those barriers where it's like, if you only got 30 minutes to get it done, then you can't spend 15 being like, where do I start? You just got to get in and start going.
Yes.
And we're also going to show you a few different techniques. Myself and Tina and Dan all have 3 different approaches to how we are going to solve this problem today. So you're going to get 3 different points of view on it.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, first things first, let's get all of y'all involved in the conversation here. So, a quick synopsis basically of what we're going to do. We're going to have y'all give us prompts of what you would like to see, what you would like to have us design in Graybox today. And then we're going to give ourselves 30 minutes each to go through and do that and Graybox out the level that you gave us the prompt for. So all of this is we're doing it live.
We're definitely doing it live.
We're doing it live, chat. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point. If I can just really quickly interject, is like, it's the point of this is to kind of put yourself outside of your comfort zone. Like, if you're not like as efficient with this, it's okay to get in and make a mistake, because that's fine. Making mistake is a extreme part of this process. Jessica and I had like a long conversation yesterday about this whole thing exactly. We're like, making mistakes, a lot of people are afraid to make mistakes. And I get it. I also have that fear. But I think what you should be afraid of is making a mistake and then not learning from it. If you make a mistake and you learn, that's awesome. Like, that is the best thing you could possibly do.
That is
you make a mistake and you're just like, well, no, it's perfect, I'm just gonna just keep going. Then you didn't learn anything, and now the mistake lingers, and it's not ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, since we're going to be taking prompts from you, obviously, I think it should go without saying that none of this was pre-planned. This is we are doing it with you here and now. So,
Tina, are you sure you're not just going to wait for the one prompt that you were waiting to pick, and you're just going to sit there and wait till you see it in chat?
You never know. Maybe I have a burner who's going to put in a prompt, and I'm like, wow, that's a great one. Actually, let's do that.
Oh, wow. That's such a good one from Weena Tisdom. Good suggestion in the chat.
I promise, chat, there are no plants in the audience today.
Don't put that out on the internet, then. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of discussion around, again, some general ideas of gray boxing and things to keep in mind. But before we do that, I want to give you all the time and opportunity. Now is the time. Give us prompts. So a couple things to keep in mind. When I say give us prompts, obviously, this is gray boxing. We are not building out a full-fledged environment. So things like make it fantasy, make it sci-fi, or things like that doesn't apply here, because it's boxes. There's not going to be any detail work. These are supposed to be very basic stand-ins for pieces of an environment, pieces that would otherwise be important to aspects of gameplay, things like that. So that doesn't necessarily help for this prompt. The things that we're looking for is like, do you want a large room? Do you want a small room? Do you want to see lots of clutter or very little clutter? Do you want to see a large room with very little clutter and see how we can make that space still interesting for a player to navigate? Or do you want to see a very enclosed space with a whole bunch of clutter that we have to be able to make some kind of pathing through that is interesting for a player, but also helps guide them through the level without them getting lost? Or do you want a labyrinth or things like that? So that's the stuff that we're looking for.
Yeah, horizontal things with verticality. Is it, are we trying, or not horizontal with verticality? I mean, I guess that's technically, it's not what I was trying to say. Are we trying to like have a horizontal play space that's very much, or are we trying to aim into like verticality where there's a lot of different layers and stuff like that? Like, is there a spiral staircase in the middle or like something like that? Don't do spiral staircases, but that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get like a good vibe. You can even kind of I don't want like not theme like in sci-fi or whatever, but like this is maybe a hospital, or this is maybe an industrial building, or things like that. Those sorts of prompts.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so go ahead and give us your suggestions. I'll grab a couple from there and I'll toss them over to Dan and Jessica. Once we have some in there, we'll just collectively as a group pick our favorite. Maybe I'll pick like a top three or so, hand it out
Yeah.
your way, see what y'all think, and then we'll toss it back to you, chat. Confirm that you're good with that, and then we'll move on to the process from there. But while we're waiting for those suggestions to come in, I did want to pose a question for the both of you because I'm curious for your thoughts on it. I know that there's many different ways to view gray boxing and what exactly it is and what purpose it serves. And honestly, this is information that varies drastically from studio to studio or even just from person to person. So I feel like it's kind of a subjective thing. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. And I am curious what gray boxing or what the gray boxing phase is for the two of you. Jessica, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So gray boxing for me is all about getting the plan that is on paper, and that's something we'll talk about when we get to that phase. I am a planner. I do like to sketch some things out beforehand, but I try not to overplan, of course. It's getting that into reality to see if the ideas that you had actually work, because sometimes you can plan all you want, but when you actually get it on into the engine and get it in front of players, because this leads right to playtesting, you realize it's not as fun as you thought it was going to be, and you need to make some changes, or you need to throw out the whole idea and start over, which is totally something that we can do. We don't want to become so connected to our ideas that we pigeonhole ourselves into a mistake early on.
Absolutely.
It's also about workflow, right? If I am trying to build a level just straight out with art assets, maybe we're creating assets that don't need to actually be made because the level changes. And we want to be able to get into programming and playtesting without having to wait for art components or things like that to be made before we can start doing things. So it's a matter of process. If we get a rough level into the game, you can very easily have art start working on art, gameplay programmers start working on gameplay, designers can start tweaking the design. Everybody can work in the level without slowing anyone down.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree, honestly, with absolutely everything you just said. I know I said there's no right or wrong answer, but I feel like you just gave the right answer. So
Yeah, I was also gonna say it's funny because the more that I talk to Jessica, the more that I'm just finding that we are like on the same plane. Like it's not only exactly what I was gonna say, but even in the way that I was gonna say it. I think that gray boxing for me is it's two things that I'm trying to do. It's one, it's make sure that the thing in here works in there. And two, to make sure that that all of those ideas and everything fit together before I even start creating the art. Because if I go in my head, I'm like, all right, here's what I'm gonna make, and then I just jump into a modeling software and start making it, and then I bring it into the engine, and my scale's all wrong, my proportions are all wrong, the line of sights are terrible, everything isn't flowing at all the way that I intended, then I have wasted all of that time modeling, because I'm gonna have to either really find a way to try to make it work by going back and essentially changing or remodeling, or start over, which is a mistake that I have made in the past, where I absolutely just had to completely throw it out, take the L, and start over. So what it allows me to do is, again, get this into there and then make sure before I really even start that it's going to work, that there's not going to be any issues with it. Because I have never done a paper draft that once I gridded it out in the engine where I was like, it's perfect. No notes.
Right.
Never happens.
no notes.
Like there's always something. And thankfully, in some cases, it's really only a few little things that aren't that big of a deal. But sometimes I'll be like, yeah, in my head, this looks so good and it's going to be great. And then you get in there and just like, why can I see the other team spawn?
Absolutely.
Okay, my paper draft has not worked. I need to start adjusting things like that. And it's way easier to block that out with literal blocks than be like, well, I have to completely start over the design after I've done all the art because I jumped the gun and jumped in too quickly.
And one thing I forgot to mention is your gray box provides ideas of scale for your environment artists. Your boxes can become the actual collision for those meshes that end up in those areas, so that your artists have a starting place.
Yeah. The other one little note that I'll add on to it, it also just like allows you to kind of guarantee that it's fun before you get in. Like this happens all the time. It was you can see it pretty much anywhere. And actually, if you're not been in the games industry yet or whatever, you can see this in behind the scenes videos, in GDC talks and stuff like that. When most environments are play tested at first, it's literally the gray box. So the designer will go in, they'll gray box it all out, they'll play test it with themselves and do some things like that. And then once they're like, okay, we think it's good, then you get a full team in there to play it. And they're going to come back with a bunch of notes about things that aren't working or things that need change or things that are working that maybe we should really emphasize. And then that process will go back and forth many, many times until everybody's happy. And then they move forward, knowing that what they're going to build on, the art is now going to support a great play space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we've got so many good suggestions that came in.
Right.
There's a few honorable mentions that I'm gonna go and talk about while y'all are doing your paper draft in a moment here, because they're hilarious and or just freaking awesome. But either for time constraints or otherwise, we probably wouldn't be able to do them today. But they're awesome ideas, and you should do them. Like, you should take those ideas for yourself. But the three that I think could be doable for us today, the first is either some kind of huge building with a very high ceiling that is set up sort of like a boss level, like a stationary boss level, where you've ran through, you've gotten to here, and now you have to finish the fight before you can leave sort of area. The second is something that would be used in some sort of chase scene down a very narrow corridor, or at least some kind of limited space that's very claustrophobic feeling. And then the third option is some kind of deep chasm with two fighting sides on either with some sort of connection across. So I imagine maybe almost like I don't even know how to describe how to imagine it, but it's a really interesting idea of like just this narrow bridge with people trying to get to either side or whatever. It's a very interesting idea too.
And I like the idea of not actually elaborating on that and just see what the interpretations are. Two things. One, that one's going to be really hard to do in 30 minutes, so I think we should. Two, the other thing that I love about this experiment is I had a million ideas that people were going to come up with, and it was none of those.
Like, yeah, exactly. None of them were that.
That is awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's see. I really like the idea of combat arenas. Whether we're talking about for a boss fight or we're chasing someone through. And so my vote is for either 1 or 3. But that's my vote. Tina, what is your vote?
Ooh,
should we take Chat's vote too? Just to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should do all of them. Yes. I am a fan of spooky stuff, so I did also like the idea of something that's very claustrophobic feeling, like you have to run through, you have obstacles you have to get through with something slowly chasing you sort of thing. So I like that idea as well. But
very like Soma or Amnesia.
I want to emphasize like that none of these are bad. Like
they're all
ideas
amazing
for all 3 of these things. So I think I really don't think there's a wrong choice here.
Yeah, so it sounds like we kind of have a vote for all 3. So we'll leave it up to you, Chat.
Well, I will second number 2. Number 2 is my number 2.
Interesting. Okay. Very cool. All right, then.
Just because I think there's so many different ways that you could go with it.
Yeah. They're really all 3 of them are amazing ideas. Thank you all so much for putting them in. Okay, Chat, go ahead. I release you. Of the 3 options, which do you think we should do today? Again, just as a quick overview, in case you're wondering, it's either a very large, high ceiling sort of boss arena sort of environment, very claustrophobic, corridor limited space chase scene scenario, or deep chasm with 2 sort of fighting arenas on either side, and some kind of connection.
I love the honesty from Chat. Chat forgot the numbers.
This is fair, honestly. I'm seeing a lot of twos and
Twos
threes
and
on
threes for
YouTube
sure.
side, seeing a lot of twos and threes on Twitch as well.
Getting a couple ones because I think everybody's playing Elden Ring. So
Yes.
looking forward to it.
Yes.
A
Let's
lot of
see.
twos.
Yeah, a lot of twos as time is ticking. Let's see. Let's have this go for maybe another 30 seconds so we can make sure people's votes get in. Um, but
One, two, three.
there's yeah.
In the
Um,
meantime, I would like to point out there was a dog coming out of the galaxy behind Tina.
coming out of the void. Yes, one of my Dorgos has decided.
Is it
Oh,
the
there's another
appropriate one?
one.
Is it Dritch? Is it the appropriate one?
Yes, it was Dritch, and
Good.
now Shar is also here, goddess of all things bad for anyone who's played Baldur's Gate 3. But all right. It
Need somebody
looks
to
like
tabulate.
ooh, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. It looks like two came out as the winner, just barely over three.
Okay.
It was one was showing up though too. That was fairly close.
Yeah, because they're all great suggestions.
I was
Like I
about to say,
said,
no bad
Yeah, they
ideas
are.
here.
yeah. If any of these sound interesting to you, then you should also make them. Like I said, all of us are going to have 30 minutes to go through and do our rendition of this prompt. 30 minutes each. So over that time, I challenge you, chat,
Ex
to also do the prompt over either 30 minutes or you could
Yes.
take the full hour and a half. I can't stop you. I think it would be fun though. You should do it with us. Take some screenshots, tag us on socials and stuff. It would be fun to see what y'all make alongside us. I think it could be really fun.
And if you don't do it now, do it later. Do it at some point. Don't do it once. Do it once a week. Do it every day if you're that ambitious. Like this, especially if level design is something that you're passionate about, this is a really good way to work out the kinks, because one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with, I know that I do, which is the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that if I put too much time into it, then I can't just start over because I've already put in so much time. Getting good at this will let you really be able to be like, all right, I only put 30 minutes to an hour in here and this is not working. So let's start over. Instead of being like, I did it for the whole day and then, oh no, but I can't because then I would have wasted the whole day.
I try to honestly dedicate time on Saturdays to spending a couple hours like working on something, whether it's here in UE or, because I love to make third person things. UEFN is actually a great tool for also doing some prototyping because so much of the gameplay is already there. It makes for a lot of fun working on things, and just that's the difference between people who are in the industry and hopefuls and juniors who are trying to get in is experience, and the only way to get that is by doing.
Absolutely.
100%.
Speaking of which, let's get started, shall we? So first thing we're going to do, a lot of people like to go through a paper drafting phase before they go right into gray boxing itself. So paper drafting, or otherwise known as concepting, or whatever else you want to call it, the very initial stages of planning. So Dan and Jessica are both going to be taking 5 minutes. Again, we're going to keep this very limited. 5 minutes to draw up some kind of paper draft, to plan out their ideas, get a little bit of a starting point. I am not going to make a paper draft because I don't do that. And we thought it was pretty valid to be able to show different ways that people work. Before we get into it, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on paper drafting and why you do it, how it helps you, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so one thing that I just want to echo with what Tina said is Tina says, I don't do paper drafts. There are people out there that will tell you Tina is wrong.
Or insane, at the very least.
As someone who does paper drafts, I don't think that Tina is wrong. This is something that we'll emphasize multiple times as we go throughout here. There are a lot of people that can be very dogmatic about like how things should and shouldn't be done. And in some instances, there really is best practices and things like that. But for most situations, it's like, what works for you? If getting it down on paper is your way of operating, then by all means, get it down on paper. If you're just like, hey, I'll just stare at this pad for 3 hours when I could just do that making, then get in there and just start making it. Like you do what works best for you. Paper drafts don't work for Tina, so she doesn't do it. Now, if Tina didn't do a paper draft and then her result was bad, and it would have been better if she had done the paper draft and just didn't want to, then we would probably want to encourage Tina to do the paper draft. But if that's really not the way that you work,
Sounds like a challenge now.
fine. Yeah, sorry, you kind of end up being the example there. I apologize on that.
I get to be the learning experience. No, but I totally agree with that. I'd love your thoughts too if you have any, Jessica, about
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
phase.
For me, as someone who's a little bit of neurospicy, I need to have paper to get the ideas out there because I have so many ideas happening all at once. I mean, even right now that we've settled on the idea, my brain's going, you could do this, you could do that, you could run through a subway, you could run through a cave. And I need it to set something not necessarily in stone, but like in clay, let's say, as a starting point to get working. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of times my work time is often interrupted. Meetings, phone calls, just, having to get up and get something to eat sometimes. And I need to know what I was planning. If the time between planning it and actually starting to build it is, maybe I start building it the next day, maybe I start building it the next week. I need to have the plan to know where I was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I know we're running all out on time, so I do two quick things that I want to add to that. The reason that I like paper drafting is the exact same reason that I like blocking things out, is because it allows me to see if the idea is bad quicker. It is way easier for me to do this than to build out a block out. So it's almost the first path of, is this a bad idea? Is it going to work? Because I can paper draft, depending on what the idea is, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, normally if I kind of have an idea of what I'm, where I'm going with in my head.
We're going to do it in 5.
We're going to try to do it in 5. But blocking that whole environment out would probably take me a couple hours. So it allows me to, again, iterate initially and be like, is this working? Is it not? Okay, it's not. Let's make the changes. Okay, now I think I have something that's, worth moving forward with. Then I'll go to the blockout stage. Then I'll do the blockout stage. Once the blockout stage is something worth moving forward with, then I'll start doing, adding models and textures and all the other stuff that goes into that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll chat a little bit about why I don't paper draft while y'all are doing it.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead, and when y'all are ready, we can start the timer.
Yeah, I'll start the timer. Just 1 second. I will say, so Jessica, you are doing yours on an iPad, correct?
Yes, I was just going to mention this as well.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to ask you, Dan, exactly how you're doing it. I am a technology person, so I have an iPad with an Apple Pencil. I have a notebook app that I use for drafting levels, drafting lists of things, like asset lists after the fact and things like that. So I will be doing that, and then I will screenshot it and send it over to Dan so he can put it up on the screen, and y'all can marvel at my terrible art. But Dan, are you doing actual paper?
Yeah, so I was going to say that I am also a technology person, but I am irresponsible with what I do and do not spend money on when it comes to technology. So I don't have an iPad. So I'm going to be going, classic paper draft here. But I wanted to kind of actually point this out for a quick second, because I know some people, they hear the idea of doing a paper draft and I'm just like, well, I don't even know where to start. A lot of people will do what Jessica is doing, which, to be honest,
until about a month ago, 2 months ago, I did it all in here. Yeah, so I had paper as well.
Yep. Some people will do it on a blank sheet of paper. Some people like using it on just like, your college rule sort of thing. I actually started on just your classic grid paper. And the reason why this worked really well for me is because it really helps me break a scene down modularly. Like, inside of Unreal is a grid.
What?
This is also a grid. So if you can think in the grid in an Unreal, then you can really easily translate that to this. Now, I've used this for, 20 some years doing it this way, but I actually recently found a similar kind of paper, but slightly different, where it is a grid, but it's just dots. And I actually like this better because then I don't have a bunch of other lines that are very distracting from the line work that I'm going to do. So I'm actually going to try this. I've not done it on this kind of piece of paper before, so we're going to try that and see how it goes. But yeah, like I said, I like this because it's grid, Unreal's grid. It really helps me just kind of connect those dots in my head.
So
Yeah.
I'm doing it digitally, but I also have a grid background on my
Nice.
on my notebook. When I do my daily lists to keep things in my head for my job, I have a small grid. I've gone with a larger grid this time, so that if I decide to build this beyond the live stream today, and you know what, actually, I probably will. I can actually use the grid to figure out, one grid square equals 10 meters, 20 meters, 50 meters, and figure out the scale.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if this is going to work. I just got a spontaneous idea. Don't mind me.
We get to watch
Maybe
the live draw.
Oh,
This is all
you
spontaneous
really probably
ideas
won't be able
today.
to see very much, but there we go. We can at least kind of look
This
at
is
it
proof.
a little bit.
This is
Yeah,
proof
yeah.
that you're drawing it now.
I just sit there and I'm just doing this the whole time, and I just go.
For 5 minutes. Yeah.
And I just had it like drawn on a different piece of paper. Like, oh wow, look at this whole. It's like 3 pages of stuff. I did that in 5 minutes. I'm so good.
Absolutely.
See, we're proving the honesty as best we can.
I love Dan's desk mat too. That is dope.
Thank you.
So good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if y'all are ready, I guess it'll be pencils up in a moment here.
Okay. Are you good to go, Jessica?
I am ready. Let's do this.
All right, here we go. So this is going to be actually interesting for me because it's going to be slightly different than I would normally go, because I often think in multiplayer kind of scenarios or things like that, or like a single player thing. This is going to be more single player, but because it's a chase, it's really kind of just going to be like a series of lines, right? So we have to kind of start at a point and just go. So Tina, I know you said you were going to talk about some stuff as we wrap this all out.
Yeah, I figure while y'all are doing that, I will keep you in the chat and y'all watching entertained by telling you about my way of working. So I don't do paper drafts. And the reason that I don't is because I have an issue with perfectionism. And I know a lot of other developers probably suffer from the same thing, where if I don't have the plan set up perfectly, or I feel like there's a part of it that isn't translating exactly the way that I want it to there on paper, I have a lot of difficulty moving past that stage onto the next. So my way of avoiding that and forcing myself over that mental hurdle is by just not doing it. There's no way to worry about if my pre-plan works or not if I don't have one. So what I do is I go directly into the engine and I draft out the plans that I have there directly in engine. That way I'm already there. I can't talk myself out of it. I can't talk myself around it. The only way to move forward is me being here in the engine and making things. It also helps me a lot to kind of play test. I like to feel things out as I make them. I do a lot of reiteration through my process. So, and reiteration is a good thing, of course, but that is very much how I do it. I make the bare bones of what I feel the general structure should be. I go in there, I play test it. I see if it feels right. Do the proportions feel right? Am I getting the experience that the level designer wanted to mimic? Am I meeting the prompt? Am I meeting the basic requirements of what this level needs to be? And if the answer to any of those is no, then I go back and I reiterate, and then I go back in, play test it again, over and over again. So that's my way of going through gray boxing in these initial phases. It's a bit of a hot take. I can't admit. There's a lot of potential pros and cons with something like this. I don't necessarily recommend it for people who are beginners. So if there is anyone who is new to game development or environment art, or even just the engine itself, I wouldn't necessarily recommend jumping into the way that I do things right away. When I first started, I did do paper drafts, and I just found over time, as I gained more experience and I learned more about how my workflow is and how I work with others, that this is what worked for me. But try paper drafting first, see if that feels right for you, works for you. And if it doesn't, if you're getting caught on that phase, like how I would, then say, well, to heck with it. I don't need this. And just get right in the engine and do the thing.
And that's a good thing that I want to emphasize again is like you. It's not that you're just like, oh, I don't like drawing, so I'm not going to do paper drafts. So then you didn't. You gave it a shot and realized that it was not conducive to your workflow, and so then you switched, and that's important. Don't just like write it off because you're like, oh, I don't want to do it. Try it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. Find something that does.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, there's about a minute of time left here, not to put any pressure on y'all. There's a minute. It flashed red for a second. It was very scary. But in the meantime, there's a couple honorable mentions.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be
I'm excited to hear the honorable mentions.
Oh, yes.
So first up was from Crow on YouTube about block out a dynamic environment, perhaps one that rotates and still needs to remain navigable. So imagine, say, a tumbling spaceship or a collapsing building. There is no way that we could do that in 30 minutes and make it live up to the expectations, but that was a fantastic prompt in general. That's a great idea.
To Crow's credit, I have always wanted to do that. Like in the first Alien versus Predator movie, there's a temple that changes every 10 minutes. I've always wanted to make a level like that.
It's a great suggestion. Turning Cog in Twitch said your mind palace, which I just love.
Ooh, yeah.
All right, pencils down. 5 minutes are up.
There was supposed to be sound to that, but I didn't get to it.
Hey, there
Your
was
sound effect was
you
perfect.
gave it to us. Yeah. Couldn't be any better. All right. Well,
I guess while Jessica goes through and gets hers all screenshotted up and sent this way, I can see if I can get this visible at all on paper here. So want to emphasize this was 5 minutes in the first iteration, but I can try to place it out.
There you go. We can see it
here. So I like the idea of a chase, and then for some reason I kind of had the idea of like a hotel in my brain. So this is loosely hotel-y. I don't know. Maybe this is your hotel room, and you have to just get out, go through. It's kind of like a lobby area. There's stairs. You go down through some maintenance tunnels and into the parking garage. It was kind of the quick idea that I got there. This is very rough, but it gets me started, and it allows me to kind of visualize what am I doing here? Like, what is the scene, and how am I going to start to build this all out?
Mm-hmm.
Then we have.
I was about to say, Dan, you should have just received mine. This is going to be exciting because this is going to require a little bit of explanation.
Let's do it.
While you're pulling that up, Turning Cog just had a question for us, and I think it's important we address it. Will there be more finger guns, or have we culturally moved past that? And no.
I hope we never end up.
No, we have not.
Yeah, now that you said it, it's gonna happen.
Never too many finger guns. Another honorable mention that I want to throw out real quick was there was an honorable mention about a dog park. And again, maybe not what we could do today, but the vibe of it is immaculate. So,
oh yeah,
thank you for that suggestion.
Like a dog. What do they call those? Agility courses. Oh, that's a good idea too.
That is actually a really good idea. Yeah.
I kind of went the horror route for Tina. What if in your dog park example, you were the monster chasing? Like you're the dog chasing, like, I don't know, another dog or a cat or a bunny or something.
Oh no. Oh, no. The drama. All right, Jessica.
I was about to say that's a rabbit hole we could totally go down.
Yeah. A rabbit hole.
No.
Oh, we got
jail time
there for a second. Okay, so explanation. So I do something that's called node mapping, and each node represents a player decision that they need to make, or like you'll notice for the second node, it says Vista. I always like to have a Vista where you introduce the player to where the goal is, so they see where they're going, and it gives them an idea of what direction they need to go. So the idea is you go into the entrance to this, cave. I was kind of thinking cave, but honestly, it can be whatever. and you run up some stairs onto a vista. You can see it like a crumbling cliff, another entrance that you have to go to. I imagine you're being chased by some sort of Lovecraftian type monster, because that's totally my jam. And then you run into this open space that has some line of sight blocking obstacles. So you kind of know which direction you need to be running. I could use light as an example of a way to move you there, or if this is something that has power-ups, create a risk-reward situation where if you have a power-up but the monster is chasing you, you need to take some time to go grab it. But you'll run through the area with obstacles, and you'll be presented with a Y branch. The goal being there to ratchet up the tension a little bit. Okay, you're being chased by this thing. You need to be able to make decisions, but here you actually have to make a decision. If you head to the left, that is what we call a disillusion node. It's a dead end. We could add a climbable path that if you notice it in time, you can get there, but it also sets it up for a nice situation where maybe we could have a tension moment where a in-game cinematic plays and you like sort of like dodge the monster and crawl between its legs and start going the other direction. And then I sort of ran out of time, so I figured we could have a climbing puzzle after the Y branch, and then another make a decision between three paths where one may be shorter but require some jumping skill. One may be longer and allow you to put some line of sight blocking terrain between you and the monster. And one just may be a short sprint where if you're good at making the run, you can make the run towards the final exit.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this because, again, I feel like a lot of people get the idea that like there's only one way to do something like that. Your paper draft is more about the whole idea and making that come together, which is very interesting because for me, the way that I do it, it's more about like, okay, how do I actually plan this environment out in terms of like actually building it, where yours is more of like, no, this is the concept stage. This is what are we doing? When are we doing it? Where are we doing it? And all that stuff like that. So it's a completely different mentality, but it helps you in the ways that you need the help, where mine helps in a different way where my brain needs the help.
And this is where, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and this is where, in my style of doing it, we're thinking about gameplay, right? The level has to support the gameplay. And if this is a chase scene, I thought, and the adjectives, if you will, or that we're using is claustrophobic, tension, that kind of thing. I want to be able to create those moments gameplay wise. We're going to be working with a very small subset of gameplay that you can do in a game like this today, just for scope reasons. And I really wanted to emphasize those things. Plus, it takes a little bit of player skill. In the beginning, we're not doing a lot of stuff that requires a lot of player skill. You're just running away from the monster and occasionally making a decision. But towards the end, okay, now you have to have a little bit of mastery of jumping or seeing where you can climb to reach the end.
Yeah.
Amazing idea.
Thank you.
The bits I did here at the beginning and end there were masterful, as always, of course.
What do you mean, Tina? You were here the whole time.
The whole
No issue with meta-human programming or anything.
Did you really not?
No, I did.
Oh, no.
It's okay.
I was like, yes, I got away with it. But I guess not. That's okay. All right.
I would have been curious to see how long it took me because I was so like in this that I didn't notice until you messaged something. And I was like, oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, my bad. Well, in the meantime, I'm going to have to kick the engine back up in the background. So we might have to change the order of things just a little bit to make sure that things keep on going.
All right.
So, Dan, since you were the middleman originally.
Oh,
I'm making
good.
the executive decision that you get to go first.
That's good because I wanted that. There's no pressure in going first or anything, so that's
No.
my favorite part.
Hey, and I'm sure a lot of a chat will agree, when you're in this kind of situation, going first like takes the pressure off. You go, you do the thing,
Yeah.
and everybody else, you can enjoy watching them work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be good. And again, gonna stress 30 minutes is not a lot of time. And especially because one of the things that a goal to do here is to provide some tips and tricks and things like that. There's definitely going to be moments where I'm stopping to explain things. So there's no way that we're going to get this done, or at least I'm going to get this done in that 30-minute time. But I'm hopefully can get as much of it possible and convey some, interesting tips and tricks and maybe things that you hadn't considered, or at least at the very minimum, just see my pipeline, because there might be things that I do that be like, oh, actually, that would kind of work with the way that I do stuff. So
Yeah.
don't mind me for a second. I wasn't prepared for this. Let me get this all spun up here and then we'll jump right in.
Absolutely. My apologies
No,
for
you're
crashing my computer.
good. You're good.
I'm so sorry.
You're good.
Now, one thing that'll be interesting, folks, is Dan and I are using the new animation gameplay template that was on the live stream last week. We both separately, this was the great part, we both separately had the same idea of, this template is able to provide us with a little bit of gameplay. If you've used it yet, it has some mantling, it has some jumping. This is my cat Mara, for everybody who has not seen a live stream with me at home before. She will make an appearance periodically because she lives in my office.
Fourth guest.
Exactly.
Where's her paper draft?
She's gonna go eat for a minute is what she's gonna do. She was too busy sleeping, actually. She loves the warmth of the air coming out of my computer. We're gonna be using that animation template to be able to give us a little bit of an opportunity to have some gameplay to build off from. Making a walking simulator is fun. It can be fun. I am not sort of dogging on that at all. But it's easier when you have something to start building from.
Yeah, so we'll have this in here. Because of the way that the motion template is set up, we won't have like the mantling and all that stuff built in because you have to place those points manually. But at least we have an idea of player scale, player movement, how fast they can run, what kind of things they can and cannot do, how high they jump, things like that, which is really important when nailing down the scale of everything. So
absolutely, metrics, people, metrics.
Yes. With that, I guess we just start the button, right?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So I just jumped in with like a regular level, basic level with some lights and things like that. I actually often will start with just a completely empty level with anything like that. Because the point of this is kind of demo some things, I figure actually having some lights and things that you could see would be a little bit more interesting. But the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and get rid of this this floor. And then really what I want to do is I want to start adding in some shapes, some like actual blockouts. So there's a few different ways you could do this. You could do this like, like bringing in like a cube and things like that. And the cube is actually going to be kind of my main thing here. So in the details panel, I'm just going to go ahead and set this to the center of the world. We can go through and start adjusting some things here to, let me have a second while I get everything set up here. As you can see, I was very, very ready for this. Here, all my windows are now closed, but I want to start with the floor and start scaling things out. So you can scale it this way. I'm actually, give me 1 second here. I'm gonna go ahead and load up. I have a thing here. I'm gonna go ahead and hide my screen for just half a second because I think I have the wrong thing open. Don't mind me, folks. This is the sake of, or the all that goes into it when you do it live.
I'm not sorry.
Vamp for just half a second while I get this.
That was the whole goal of doing it this way too.
And it's working. It's totally
absolutely.
Working. Yeah.
Chaos Goblin energy today.
Yes, absolutely. Which I'm personally a fan of always as a minion of chaos myself. I guess we haven't addressed it in this stream, so I'll do it real quick for everyone that keeps asking why Dan has two sets of headphones. It's because he also runs all of the tech for the stream. So
Yeah.
he has to be able to hear the stream and us separately in a call, just to make sure everything is running smoothly. But I do appreciate the questions of things, like when will we get Dan accurate metahumans with extra sets of ears and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're back up and running. I finally got everything opened here. I was originally pulling in these basic shapes to show that you can use these. There's actually really not any problem with using like basic geometry to build out your scene, but I actually personally prefer using the actual geometry, mostly because it allows me to put direct input into the values for everything and know that it will always align into the grid and I won't have any issues with things not working that way. So when you bring in something, you can go. So if you don't have this up here, you can just get the place actors panel. That was what was missing that I was trying to find. And you can then go over here and drag these in. And you could, in theory, scale them with these transform tools. And this will align to the grid for the most part. But you'll notice that if on this part, I'm actually getting it slightly off the grid. It's still actually on the grid, but it's on a 5, not a 10. So scaling in that way can work, but it doesn't give me the most control. Again, I want to emphasize these are personal preference things for me. I like working with numbers, like Jessica said, metric, all that fun stuff. So knowing that I can just type in a number and it gets me exactly what I want is what I like to do. So I will often keep that at just 111, I almost called 000, and then actually just input these numbers in through the brush. So let's go ahead and spit out just a couple sizes here. And again, the whole point with the block out is to make sure that it's working and play test. So I'm going to start with that kind of floor and I'm going to play on it. Now, if I'm thinking this is going to be like a hallway, you could get as far as to be like, what are the average dimensions of a hallway? And you could put that in. But the other thing that we need to consider when it goes to making a play space is that it needs to be fun. The realistic part of it is only part of the equation. So if you need a hallway that's a little wider than it would actually be to be a fun play space, then you need a hallway that's a little bit wider than it should be to be a fun play space. In third person specifically, you need a lot more room than you think. This actually came up quite often with the Titan live streams that were hosted by the lovely crew on the Fridays for the past couple of months, where it is a third person thing. And a lot of the doorways were too small. A lot of the platforms were too small. A lot of the pathways were too small. So when you're going third person, that's something that you'll have to consider. Tina, did we decide that you were going to do yours for first person? Is that official?
Yes.
Am I okay? So that's a good thing to show, is that what I might need to do will probably be different than what Tina will need to do for hers, because when you can get first person, you can get a lot more claustrophobic and a lot more snug. But with a third person, you got a camera that's got to exist so far behind the player that if it whips around, it needs room to actually do that instead of just constantly hitting walls and clipping and all of that fun stuff.
And we call this the 3 C's. Remember, Dan? Characters,
yes.
Cameras, and I always blank on the last one. Right?
Controls.
Yes.
Oh, that's so good.
Remember, Tina, we talked earlier, we know the stuff, but sometimes the brain just freezes, generally at the least exciting moment.
Yeah. So one of the things that you might see happening too, in case you don't know how to do this, if you use the bracket keys, you can increase and decrease your grid scale without having to go up here and change it. I will do this quite often because there'll be points where I'll need to do some fine-tuned movements. But if I'm really just trying to slam something into a position, it's way easier for me to just bring that grid up and then make larger movements instead of trying to finesse smaller little movements here. So right now I'm just kind of doing the main path here that I had the idea of, and then I'll start adding the walls. I actually don't want to go too far with this because once I add the walls, I might find that the scale needs to be adjusted. And again, that would be a bunch of undone work that I would have to do if I didn't verify it initially. So I'm going to pull the same thing off. And then again, I'm just going to type these sorts of values in here. I know that this is here, so this needs to be 10 because that's how, well, I probably should do 20, but we're flying. We're doing it quick. And now I have a lovely little wall that I can go ahead and place in. So I'll grab these two, bring that over, and move this over. I'm probably just going to sit here and ramble. So if you guys have things to add, just don't be afraid to interrupt
I
me.
like hearing the rambles though. I like hearing your thought process while you're going through and building it.
There's
And
any important things that you're like, oh, what would you do with this thing? Or here's a question, like just don't be afraid to interrupt me because I will sit there and ramble. So I just used 300 by 300 by 300 for this, and I'm actually pretty happy with the width. Could probably change it a little bit, but I'm not happy with the height. I kind of want this to feel a little bit more imposing. And if anybody's been in a hotel, they are strangely tall usually. They're usually much more narrow than they are tall. So in this case, because I'm not going narrow in the play space, I just need to exaggerate that height so that way it still gives me that feeling of being in a hotel. So I'm actually going to grab all these.
And that's something you'll also often find that you need for a third person is, you know, you can measure out the room, turn it into metric, and do an exact replica of a hotel room, but it might not work for your camera with third person. So you have to exaggerate that scale just a little bit to make sure that there's room for the camera and that it conveys the correct feeling.
Exactly. The realism is, again, it's only one part of it. You really want to make sure that the feel is there. This is feeling a little bit better to me. It's actually feeling almost a little too tall now. So I think I'm going to find that kind of halfway point. And now normally I would be much more clever with this and actually lower it so I'm not having some weird intersection. For the sake of actually trying to get this done, because we've already burned through 10 minutes, I'm just going to leave it kind of intersecting there. It's bad practice. Do as I say, not as I do.
Well, as long as the player doesn't see it, intersection in my book is okay. You know, plus in a blockout.
Yeah, it is okay. This is more of just like a general best practices, things like that. Because like now, if I were to export this out into a modeling software, or I could use the modeling tools in here. But if I were to export this out into a modeling software, and I wasn't aware of what I was doing here, I could actually build things to the wrong scale. Because if I go like, all right, here's my wall, and I isolate it, and I don't realize that I've actually clipped part of it through, then I might build the wall incorrectly. So again, no wrong answers, but just make sure that your workflow works for you and that you're doing things that you understand so that way you don't make mistakes like that. Again, speaking definitely not out of experience because I would never do something so foolish.
oh no, never, of course. Goodness gracious. Let's see. I did see a couple questions in here earlier that I wanna tackle wherever they may be. I had them. Give me a second. I promise they exist. They were there. We were here. God, that was a crazy show. Anyway, besides the point. Okay, yeah, one of the questions here, do you find that it's better to do your gray boxing directly in Engine, or do you ever do it in other softwares such as Blender or Maya or other modeling tools?
Back before I was really using Unreal Engine, I would gray box in another third-party DCC just because that's kind of the way it was, at least when I started a long time ago, folks. I don't like to talk about it, but it's been a minute. So we didn't have amazing BSP and CSG tools when I first started. So yes, I would do it in a third-party software. This is another example of, again, I would just say do what works for you. The reason that I prefer using Unreal is because that I didn't have to bring it from software back in and then back out every single time I wanted to see if this was working the way that I wanted it to. It was a play a button and I know if the scale or the pathings are working, and that's that simple. I do it for speed and efficiency. It really is the main reason for me.
I much prefer to do it in Unreal for a lot of the same reasons that Dan does. If you're doing it in a separate 3D application, you have a round trip where you have to send out the data, import it, update it. I can just build it in Engine. And again, with a gray box, we're not trying to get super complicated. Primitives are the point. And there's a lot of things that you can do with primitives that you don't need to 3D model exactly in. I know that in other applications, you kind of have to do it that way. And I probably started around the same time Dan did. I mean, we're talking ages ago at this point.
Too long.
Yeah, too long. But even when I was working in a couple of versions of Unreal ago, let's say, I always tried to build in engine because those BSP and CSG pieces did good enough for what it was for.
Absolutely. Oh, here
So
we
there, I
go.
just
We're
kind of
starting
built
to
a
see some
little,
obstacles.
yeah, a little bit of obstacles. So you might initially wanted to go down that hall, but then you're kind of blocked off. So it's going to push you out this way. And again, the blockout is supposed to be rough. It's supposed to be simple. This, kind of as Tina was saying, like the theme doesn't really matter. This could be anything you want. This could be a vending machine. This could be a truck. Like, you could put whatever you want there. The point is that it serves the gameplay side to make sure the gameplay is fun. And then art direction can go in and art it up to make sense for whatever it is that your scene is that you're doing.
Yeah. And I want to expand on that a little bit because we actually just got a question from chat asking what are the biggest mistakes or misconceptions in the gray boxing process? And this is one of those things I would say. It's really easy to get kind of lost in the sauce, so to say, in the gray boxing phase and add just too many details. What Dan just did there was perfect. He knows that there's going to be some kind of obstacle that blocks the player from going down this path. And for now, all that needs to be there is something that blocks the player's path, because that's going to eventually be replaced entirely with an actually realized asset. So for now, when you're just trying to get the basics of a design that works and serve its purpose, you don't need to figure out exactly what that is. You don't even have to figure out necessarily its general shape at the moment either, especially with a time limit like this. You just need to have something that serves the purpose of, okay, this stops the player character from progressing in this direction. And that's one of the main misconceptions, I feel, is just adding way too much detail. This just needs to serve gameplay purposes, testing purposes, and that's it.
Yeah, the way that I always try to say it is the whole point of the gray box is to just make sure that your scale, your proportions are correct, and that the play space is fun. Details don't matter. Everything else is irrelevant. You'll handle that part later in the process.
Absolutely. I think what I'm going to say is just going to mirror what Tina and Dan is saying, except for what I would add is it's easy to get lost in the sauce, as it were, with obsessing about, is this part perfect? Are these metrics perfect? It's meant to be rough. It's meant to convey play, and you're not going to be thinking about some of these details when you're building this gray box. Sometimes maybe you don't even know what the art style is going to be yet. Maybe that's being worked on while you're still figuring it out. Maybe you have a little bit of narrative to go on that you can work from, but still, you're there to support the gameplay. You're there to make a level that teaches and communicates to the player what they need to know to be successful, and to make some kind of fun thing to challenge them with. So I love where Dan's going here, but it is very easy to get caught up in perfection, and I would really want to encourage folks to avoid that. If you're working on a part and you notice you start to kind of get lost in making sure your seams are right and things like that, catch yourself, move on. I did not, that was not calling Dan out right here, by the way.
It was just very convenient timing, Jessica.
It was just very convenient timing.
Yeah. Dan, if you're, I'm going to make this hard mode for you and keep throwing questions at you while you're trying to focus. But we got a couple people in chat questioning, both Albert and who else was it? I want to give you credit for your great questions. And Drizdo Erden from Twitch as well. Both of them are wondering, why are you using modular pieces instead of larger stretched out shapes?
Great question.
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. This is it's almost born of habit. I tend to work very modular, as I would argue most of you should. But there is a downside to modularity, and that is that it can feel modular. So a lot of times what I'll really like to do is I'll try to make my meshes as modular as possible, but I'll also try to make sure that my materials are modular as well. That way that I can actually make some bespoke pieces to kind of fit in that, in that shape that don't necessarily have to be really modular. But Yeah, it's really a part of just, what I've done. But I also think that it's a good practice because you guys should be working modular for the most part. Like, not everything is going to be a bespoke mesh. Not every asset is going to be taken into Substance Painter and things like that. You'd actually be surprised, especially if you're not in the industry, you'd be surprised how few actually bespoke textures there really are in a lot of projects. The vast majority of it is going to be tiling. So if you're going to be using tiling, then you can also work very easily in a modular workflow. So there's a lot of different things that you can hit on with that. But that's one of the main things here. And it just allows me to work kind of quick and know that I'm not building things that aren't going to fit together. Because if I get really slapdash with this, and let's just use this as an example, and I just start kind of scaling things and sticking them together, and then I go in and I'm done. I'm like, all right, cool, the play space is there. I might ostensibly have to rebuild my block out because things aren't fitting together or working or connecting in the way that I need them to. So this kind of lets me know that what I'm building will work, and then I can start going in and adding the character a little bit later, so it's not just everything is 300 by 300 in the entire scene and you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
What I would add to that is that it also helps to think modularly, because it supports your artists that are going to come in and use your block out for reference afterwards. You always want to build an environment in a modular way with as few bespoke meshes as possible, so that you are building something that, and I apologize, I was working in UEFN, so now I'm thinking about space requirements. But to bring it back to level design, you're supporting your environment artists by providing them with a space. Okay, this mesh that is going to go here, whether it's a barrel or a pillar or what have you, has to fit this space. Like that piece that Dan just walked by that he used to block that path. That block ends up being the space that an artist can use as a starting point for building and scaling the mesh that they build for that piece.
Yeah.
And that's going to be true for anything, that stairway, the floor tiles. So if you've ever gone into something like any type of mod tools for a game, and noticed, oh yeah, you have wall piece, wall piece, wall piece, and then a 45-degree bend. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can reuse those pieces and reduce the amount of specific meshes that your artists have to make.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then now this is an example of, for the sake of speed, I was getting a little ahead of myself. And I made that wrong, and it didn't feel very good. And if I had arted all of those pieces at that point and then brought it in, I would have wasted a lot of time. I'm now able to just go in here and be like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, grab everything, move it over, extend this out a little bit. Looks like my alignment is not quite. And get it
like
fixed
gasp
instead of, oh, the shame. And get it adjusted so that way it does actually feel good, and I'm happy with it now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to verify that the change that I made, I'm actually happy with.
And people don't want to think about it, but that time is money. Whether you're AAA or an indie, maybe you're an indie and you you skipped your blockout phase and you sent some sketches to someone to make it, and you paid them to make some art. And then because you had to make these changes, you don't use it. That's wasted money right there.
Yeah, wasted money, wasted time, and it's also, and this is like a small consideration, but it's something that I do consider. It's also a really big bummer when you spend a bunch of time working on something and then it doesn't make it into your project. It's like, oh man, that would have been cool.
Absolutely.
I like when that's, it would have been sweet to see that in there.
Yeah. This is not me rushing you. This is just me letting you know you have about 9 minutes left for your build.
I'm actually kind of surprised. I think I might get most of my idea, at least very haphazardly, slammed in here.
You're making really good progress. You really are.
So it's kind of coming together. So
you're setting the bar high for us, Tina.
I know. I should have gone first so that nobody could compare me to anything, and I could have the excuse of, well, I went first, so there were no standards yet. What have I done?
Now, right here is really a good example of I am putting this together here really slapdash. And if I wasn't on a timer, I would be more deliberate and precise with what I'm doing here. But at this point, I'm just trying to make sure that we have something to look at once we're all said and done here. So
Mm.
Again, another example of do as I say, not as I do. Even though I always say what people
Uh,
say.
Got another great question here from chat, from ones and twos. They're wondering if you know lighting within the environment will play a big part of the game's mood and gameplay. How do you deal with that in early blockout phases?
Light it. I mean,
Yep.
that
I was going to say
sounds
the same thing.
like it sounds like a cop out kind of cheap answer, but 100%. I'm actually curious, Jessica, what your thought on this, because when I say this, I do get pushback from some people. If I know that I'm going to be fully responsible for a level from front to back, from design to the art stage, I will light my block out to get me about 80% there or 90% there before I do anything else. So it will be block out, make sure it's playable, light it, make sure that it's fun and looks good, and make sure that those all come together. And then I'll start bringing in materials and make any changes I need to from the lighting there. Because again, the whole point is about the atmosphere and mood, and lighting is your atmosphere and mood. So you want to try to nail that down kind of as early as possible, because what might feel oppressive when or maybe not oppressive, maybe the whole point is that it's not oppressive when you're in the blockout stage, could then feel oppressive once you have the light, or vice versa, where you're like, all right, this feels really good, but then I lit it and now it's not really working, I need to make adjustments. Those play into each other more than I think some people consider.
I'm going to agree with you there. For me, it depends on, again, what part of the level am I responsible for. And if I'm just responsible for placing things in the level, and maybe lighting is a part of gameplay. If we think back to what am I thinking of? Early stealth games.
Mm.
If you are responsible for having, this is where shadow and light is, so that the player has a path through it without alerting the enemies, I'm going to do some basic lighting in there.
Yeah.
I'm not a lighting artist,
Definitely.
and so ultimately I will leave it up to the professionals on that side. But if it requires you, if lighting is a part of the gameplay, I am absolutely going to put some cues in there to make sure that it plays correctly. Because the way I see it for a level designer is you're responsible for building it and how it plays.
Yes.
It needs to convey the right feeling. It needs to be fun. But if you're not responsible for lighting, don't take it upon yourself to light it, unless it's an important part of the gameplay.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, knowing the what you're responsible for is a huge part of it. So if you're like an indie dev or you're part of a small team and you do have that responsibility, then by all means go for it. If the whole point is design, but as Jessica said, lighting is important to it, at least get it lit so that you feel like it's correct. They could go in and completely change it, and then you might have to adapt to that. But if your whole point is to design the level, then design the level. If helping you design the level is lighting it, then do some rudimentary lighting, even if it gets changed, because that lets you know that you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I always like to tell my students, to go back to the education background that we all have, when I taught, you are only responsible for what you're responsible for, and making games is a team sport.
Yes.
Even if you are a solo developer, you're probably going to contract with others for some of the work, and you're going to be working with them. So, things that you can do as a level designer that support your artists, whether they are environment artists or lighting artists, do those things, but don't do their job for them.
Yes.
Yes, that's a really good note to put in.
Yeah.
Know the role.
Know the role, and I feel like this is especially important for smaller studios as well, or indie developers. The gray boxing phase is important because it's the foundation that you're building everything off of. But it's important, like they're saying, to know what it is that you're going to be responsible for. Because if you are a solo dev, for example, and you know that you have to do everything from start to finish, full stop, there may be things that you want to do in this phase that will be helpful for you later on that would make absolutely no sense for someone on a larger team or even a small team with just multiple roles in it to do. And we've mentioned it a few times, and I'm just going to sound like a broken record at this point, but a huge part of this phase is just doing what works for you and finding what works for you in your workflow and what's going to ultimately get you closer to the finish line. Because we can all start projects. Everyone is capable of starting a project. The hard part is following through and finishing it. So make sure you're laying the groundwork of what you need to make sure that this can continue on the pipeline to eventual completion. Because that's, again, harkening back to my own things I was talking about being a perfectionist, where certain stages I'll get hung up on and just let it stay in development hell forever. You can't do that. So finding the things that help you push past those particular barriers is very helpful, especially in this phase. You want to get excited about it, right?
Yeah. One of the things I learned from some design training that I had several years ago is always having a bias towards action, right? You always want to be doing some planning, but let's hop in and do it. There's no substitution for jumping in and actually doing the thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, we got about
I'm really impressed, Dan.
here.
You've got a little less than 2 minutes, yeah.
Let's see how this feels, and then maybe make any additional changes like that. That would, okay, block that off.
I hope you know that when it's done, I'm gonna need you to run through this and explain to me what is happening in your gameplay imagination here.
Okay, I will do. Yeah, I actually think I largely got this. I mean, I would want to add maybe some more interesting obstacles into here. So if this is like a lobby, then I don't know, we'll make the most quick, rudimentary couch you ever saw in your life. But some sort of like seating arrangement. Maybe make it a little longer, to maybe 60. And you can be really precise with this and like actually find like what is the measurement of a couch or something like that. Like you can actually find different things to get you there. But again, don't feel beholden to those measurements, because I think a lot of people, as an instructor, I saw this happen quite often with my students where they're like, well, the doorway is this many centimeters, so I made it that big. And it's like, yeah, but is it working? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, then you need to change it. So use them as a great foundation, but you don't have to feel restricted to them completely.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty big misconception, not just with video games, but a lot of media in general. Same thing with films and such as well. A lot of what you're seeing is smoke and mirrors to mimic the feeling of something in reality, not necessarily to exactly copy something from reality one to one. Because typically, if you do, it actually won't feel great. Like if you want a claustrophobic space, a room that might feel claustrophobic in reality, you're done. Hands down, don't touch anything, man. But something that would feel that way realistically in actual life may not translate that way over to a digital space. So
yeah,
play test.
One of the things I often think of is that fun and holding to reality is on a sliding scale. If you want a very realistic game, you're going to sacrifice some of the fun elements to get there. But at the same time, if you are working in a realistic environment, but you're making an arcade shooter, there's a lot of realism you're going to sacrifice to make it fun for the player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're running low on time, so I'll make this kind of as brief as possible. But the idea is largely the same for what we ended up with here. Let me actually just make this.
Run me through it, like literally run me through it, and what's happening as you're going through.
So if you look at it from here, start, round. Oh, I'm trying to do this inverted through my head. Up through here, down in here, down below, through the thing, and then I didn't actually make the other bend here, but
that's fine.
So let's just go back to the beginning. So I don't know.
You're being chased.
Yeah.
Big bad.
I'm in my room and then there's something in the bathroom and oh my gosh. So I leave out of my room and then, there would be like doorways here and this one's closed. So I want to go this way, but then, oh, there's something blocked off this way. So I want to go here and then I want to go this way. And maybe this thing's blocking me. And then I don't know, maybe there's another another big bad right here that's like scripted to run this way at me. So instead of trying to run towards it and go around the stairs, maybe I just leap and jump over the edge, land down here, and then here's the exit sign. And I'm running, and then this would eventually take you to, like, I don't know, like the garage or another place. I mean, this is a very short stint. You could have many different things here. But that's kind of like the main idea of what was built there. And I would iterate on this a lot. Again, 30 minutes isn't a lot of time. There's things about this that I'm like, the scale's a little bit weird. I actually want to add this thing. It'd be interesting if there was more cover and maybe a little bit more interesting things instead of just running down 2 hallways, jumping off a balcony, and then being done. You know, that sort of thing. But it allows me to get in here and try it and see how it feels, see what's working. I mean, we can sit here and look at this and be like, yeah, there's a million things that I correct. This took 30 minutes.
Yep. And it's impressive for 30 minutes.
Give it a couple hours and you could actually have a really interesting level here. Now, this is one thing that I'm going to touch on real quick and then we'll get over to Tina. But one thing to mention is we talked about kind of the doorways. And I made this doorway wider. I mean, you can fit basically 2 of Quinn here in this door. I don't know if you try to put 2 people in a doorway, it usually doesn't work that well. And I would actually argue that I probably need to go a little bit wider here, but I definitely needed to go taller because if I'm like, you know, very level with the camera, it feels pretty good. But if I'm like looking down at all, my camera is now
you got that really jarring
through the door frame. So I need this door to be a little bit wider and taller than it probably normally would be, just so that I can make sure that I'm having a nice feel with the gameplay and with the camera and things like that. So consider your perspective, consider your game modes, consider what your players can do, consider the mechanics, consider all those sorts of things, because they all dictate this. And this is everything. This is your foundation. You take away all the pretty art in any of your favorite games, and this is what's there. So make sure that you get this down pat. And don't be afraid to get in here and play around with it. Again, I've thrown away probably 80% of the levels that I've designed because they didn't turn out very good. But it's taught me so many different things now, so that way I can actually design. I don't want to say this was a good design, but hopefully you know what I'm saying. Like, I know how to design now because of all those learnings and things like this. Like, this is a really great tool. This was a fun exercise. I actually used to do this a lot years and years and years ago. I haven't done this in forever, and I forgot how much dang fun it was. And I really want to keep doing that stuff because that was really fun.
Yeah, it is. It's always a good time. All right. Well, that was pretty dang impressive for 30 minutes there, Dan. Thanks a lot for that.
It was a fumbled start, but we got there.
All right. What I'm really, really excited about to do for mine, I'll go next here. I'll get my screen share up in just a second. But instead of having a third person camera view, I'm going to be doing first person instead. So the way that I have to account for, the perspective and the sizing of things is going to be a little bit different than how Dan had to handle it. The other thing that I'm really excited about is there's so many things that you do, Dan, that I don't at all. And there are so many things that you're like, I don't know if that's the best practice, that I 100% do.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to that statement we said at the beginning, which is there's really not a right way. It's find the way that works for you. If you're doing it in a way that's inefficient and you feel like you're not being productive and you're constantly, banging against barriers and walls and you're just not feeling good about what you can do, then that almost certainly means that there's inefficiencies with your pipeline that you need to figure out. Whatever that ends up looking like so that you feel confident like you can do the job, that's all that matters. I don't care what this person thinks is the best way to make an environment because it might not work for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I've got my screen up. I guess I'm ready to start whenever you're ready to start the thing.
All right. And
so much pressure.
Go.
All
right. Got this, Tina. Let's go.
Get your panel up.
So, first and foremost, I just use static meshes because I'm a heathen.
Oh, no.
But, I also, when I do gray boxing, at least because again, since I don't do paper drafting, I consider my very initial gray box is kind of as my concepting actually. So I don't work modularly either. I do the exact thing that they were like, don't do that because you are going to need to work modular, which is true. When it comes to the actual creation, these pieces that I'm making will need to be broken down into modular pieces. But for the purposes of today and for the gray boxing that I do, I'm not going to do that.
Level designers hate this one weird trick.
Yeah, right, right.
Exactly. So my thought process for mine, I am a huge fan of fantasy in particular. I'm also going to be having so much overlapping and intersecting. I exist as your antithesis, Dan.
Oh no.
And
Oh no.
what's gonna be interesting too with me going last is I exist somewhere in between the two of you.
Oh, this is perfect then. So yeah, the idea that I have for mine, I love fantasy so much. And so I was trying to think of some kind of approach from a fantasy world and what is something that feels intrinsically claustrophobic and very stressful. And I was thinking of trying to run through a bandit cave or like a bandit hideout, where either you were captured or there's some monster that came out from deeper in a cavern or something and it also is chasing the bandits and you're all just trying to get the hell out of here. There's a couple different things that could be happening, but that's my general concept is a cave, something more naturalistic. Now, because of that, I'm not going to have near as many nice 90-degree cuts and turns as Dan had in his. I'm going to be doing, like I said, a lot of intersecting, a lot of non-specific rotations and things like that, just to sort of mimic the feel of something that would naturally happen through erosion and things like that. Now, I am still going to be using primitives, so that's something to keep in mind for sure. But
yeah, and I would like to just kind of jump off that a little bit too, because this is a really great example of knowing what you need to do and what you need to accomplish if you're going to be working with very modular pieces. And oftentimes buildings, anything really man-made, will often have a good amount of modularity in it, unless the whole point of it is for it to not. So in that case, it would make more sense to be very considerate of your grid, of making sure things are aligned. If you're just doing a cave, like nature is the antithesis of structure. Like it is about the chaos. It is about smashing things together and putting things into themselves. So in this instance, Tina, I might even argue that I also would not fret over the grid. Unless I had a gameplay reason that I needed to, I probably wouldn't worry about it too much, because it's supposed to be organic. It's supposed to be chaotic. It's supposed to feel natural. And the most unnatural thing in nature is a straight line.
yes,
Sometimes the
absolutely.
hardest thing as a designer is to fake something that's supposed to be organic or random.
Yes.
Because inherently the human brain imposes order on chaos, and we look for patterns and we inadvertently build in patterns. And we'll probably see this with Tina as Tina is building this and trying to create something that feels natural. We'll be able to look at it and go, no, it still kind of feels like a corridor. But then that's where your props come in, right? You can build with 90-degree angles or 45-degree angles and whatnot, and place a boulder over here to make it feel rounded, place a pillar here to hide where two walls overlap. There's a lot in environment art and level design that is just hiding joins and adding things to make a space feel interesting.
Yes.
And break up the patterns.
Absolutely. And I do definitely want to iterate a little bit on some of what y'all are saying. This is, again, I've built quite a few environments in my life, both professionally and just for fun. And there's a time and a place for different methods. What I'm doing right now works for the concept that I had. What I'm doing right now, if I were to make a very modular, clean cut, like a hospital or even like a hotel, like you did, Dan, that's supposed to be very clean. this is this is a nightmare way to approach
Not.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely consider what is your concept, which actually brings me into I have a little tiny bit of a teaching thing that I wanted to comment on while I'm doing this. This is something I used to teach my students ages ago, once upon a time when I was also an educator.
Back when I was.
Um, instead of the three C's, well, I shouldn't say instead of, I should say in addition to the three C's, because those are also very important. I have something called the three S's. And those S's are first, set scene, second, simplify. I'm looking down at my notes if you're wondering why I'm looking down. And three, settle. So, set scene, first and foremost, that is step one, where you, as the name describes, set the scene that you are trying to make. You have to consider what are the parameters that were set for you through your designers, or what is the eventual gameplay loop, and things like that. This is also the time when you really need to consider your big shapes. This is why, for the most part, I'm working from sort of an above perspective, so I can see what the whole level layout looks like from above. Obviously, this is not how it's going to be experienced, but this is how I set the scene, get in the mindset of, all right, we're making a cave. We're making something that's supposed to feel fairly naturalistic, so on and so forth. Then next, for simplify, and we'll get to that in a second, my overall layout is not going to be terribly complex because I mostly want to focus on props and oh my god, it's a word that starts with an O, and I literally said it earlier today, but I can't think of it.
Obstacles?
Obstacles?
Obstacles! Thank you.
Get out of my brain, Dan.
I don't know. The more I learn, I think it's kind of the same brain.
Yeah, honestly. I'm getting a little scared as time goes on. I feel like y'all
Now
are 2
I'm never going to
halves.
be invited back. Nope, you and Dan are too similar.
It's
I can't.
too much power.
I was going to
is
say
what
handle
it
both
is.
you
of
might be the balance, because I feel like you're kind of this middle point between Tina and I. You might be the
You're the anchor
balance.
we need.
Yeah.
My design method will just reinforce that point. So
Now, Tina,
Yes.
I have a question.
I have an answer.
If you're doing, you said this game like a kind of like a cave kind of environment.
Mhm.
Are you going to add any sort of vertical element to it, or for the
I
sake
sure
of
am.
keeping this simple, not worry too much about that right now? Because that, as much as I love verticality, that adds quite literally a whole new dimension of problems. They're great problems,
Yes.
but they're things that you have to consider. And I could definitely see in a 20-minute demo, maybe foregoing something like that for the sake of actually having enough time to do everything else.
So I am going to be adding some, but, and this is another thing I wanted to point out, is a lot of things in environment art and level design is there to help create the feeling of something and not necessarily there for a functional purpose. So I am going to have this section here that kind of opens up into a wider part of the cave. There's going to be some verticality to this, but that's going to be entirely for the aesthetic of it. There's not going to be a place for a player character to run up to or climb up to or anything like that. It's just going to be there to help really sell that this is a cave with natural formations in it. I need to stop hitting the Windows button is what I need to do. Trying to hit Alt and I keep hitting the Windows button.
So here's a question for the group. And this kind of builds off what you both were just talking about. A question that I often get is, you know, if you are creating a linear experience, kind of like we are here, what do you add to it so it doesn't feel linear? How do you make it interesting without moving away from that requirement?
The answer is the illusion of choice. Really,
Yes.
like, I mean, there's other ways, like in different ways that you could phrase it, but it really is kind of that. If the whole point is that you have to go from one point to another point, the only option is from one point to the other point. The only thing that you can really add to that is the way that they get to that point. You'll see it often described as like the diamond shape of progression, where you start at a point and then you have some choice here, but eventually you still end up at that same position. And the way that I like to do that in an environment is multiple routes, or if not going multiple routes, at least variation in how you tackle the route that you're given. Do you jump over the balcony? Do you take the stairs? Do you, I don't know, you can take an elevator, I guess. If there's an elevator shaft, maybe it's empty and you jump straight down the elevator shaft, like different ways like that. Maybe there's a vent in the side that you can use to kind of, maneuver down that way. Those sorts of things that still get you to where you're, need to go, but allow you to have some, even if it's ultimately limited, agency in how you do that.
I completely agree. I think props and clutter is the way to make something that is linear feel less linear, both visually and just gameplay wise. I think having obstacles or things that you have to work through or around will make something feel like you have more agency in explorability than you maybe necessarily have overall. All right, so I have more or less my basic setup here. Now I'm gonna get into the clutter or the obstacles and refuse and all that kind of stuff. Since it's supposed to be like a bandit camp, I'm gonna have some barrels and
I thought you were gonna say, "This is my bandit."
This is my bandit. This is what you are running
His
from.
His name is Tony.
I know games are all about fake it till you make it, but throwing down a cylinder and naming it Tony is the epitome of faking it.
I don't know. I think Thomas Was Alone is a pretty good example of that sort of thing.
Just gonna get a couple different sizes here. Feel free to also ask me things or yell at me while I'm doing this when I get too quiet.
Are you having a good time?
I'm having a great time. I'm mildly stressed out, but I knew that going into it.
Chat says make those barrels explode.
Make them explode? All right, yeah. You got it, chat. Just for you.
That was always something that would come up in my classes when we were talking about things is, we'd be blocking in something like this and make the barrels explode. And it would always give me a great opening to talk about just how many steps it takes to make a barrel explode, right? So, we're talking about quickly building a level and blocking some stuff out with some minor details in 30 minutes. To create a barrel requires you to take a mesh and apply some programming for it. And, you have to apply what is triggering the explosion. How does it happen? Figure out the timing of it, do the coding of it, whether you're doing it in C++ or Blueprint. And then you have to start thinking about, okay, how do I cover the transition from the barrel being there to the barrel not being there? Because players don't like to see, I shot it and then it just disappeared. So, okay, right. Now I got to think about, let's add some Niagara particles. Let's add some fire. Let's add some smoke. Oh, wait. It's not believable without sound. Okay, now I have to add a sound emitter and all of that. And so what should be an explosive barrel is now easily 2 hours in and of itself.
Yeah. I did get a question here, and I'm curious, Jessica, if you have any thoughts on this. Thoughts on using cube grid for the gray boxing phase?
Now, I have a lot to say on that, actually, because when cube grid first came out and the modeling tools in Engine first came out, I was the writer for that. Cube grid is a fantastic tool for doing level design, and actually I would have used it today had I had a little bit more practice with it. I'm going to use a plugin that is part of my workflow and has been for about a year or so. I'm going to use actually a couple of plugins that I will introduce you guys to today. But cube grid would essentially replace one of these. which would definitely be good because the goal, a lot of the goals around UE5 is giving you the tools in engine to do the things you want to do. Cube Grid is a great tool to it. It takes a little bit of getting used to, adjusting the grid as you go, using the hotkeys to move the grid as needed, but it's a great tool for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that completely. As Jessica said, Cube Grid was something that I contemplated actually using for today. The only reason that I didn't is because I did not have enough time to really brush up on it in a way that I felt confident enough to demonstrate. But in my time using it, I think it's gonna be my new way of going. Like, I really do like the way that that tool works. But I wanted to make sure that I was showing something that was cohesive and that I had any chance of actually finishing in the 30-minute time.
30 minutes is not a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time. And again, I feel like we're going to kind of be broken record with this, but again, it's really kind of like, how, like, does it work for you? Like, if you're more comfortable with Cube Grid, then by all means, if you're like, hey, listen, I've developed all of this pipeline and almost like muscle memory with how I do it this way, so I'm way more efficient doing it that way, then do it that way. It's really about finding what works for you. And Tina's little hallway there, that's coming together. That looks cool.
I like the way those fallen beams sort of frame the direction that the player needs to go.
And then you're immediately hit with an obstacle out of it, so you can't just like continue in that direction, which is also really cool.
Yes, definitely. And that's something. This is why I like to add clutter and obstacles, because this is exactly what I was talking about earlier after you asked Jessica about like how to make it linear but exciting in a way for the player too, where it's not just like you're being led directly where to go, follow this step and this step. Especially in something like a chase scene, there needs to be something that adds adrenaline, right? You need to feel like, oh man, if I miss this step or if I trip over this thing, I'm done for. This thing is right behind me,
And that's me.
Exactly.
And also one of the things we haven't talked about too is when you're in a tension scene like that and you're being chased, you need to signpost your level so that the player can look at a glance and know what direction to go. There's ways you can do that by, again, using light, was something that we talked about before. But there's something that we call leading lines that can also help you move from one place to another. And I like that Tina's almost like seesaw piece right there, that horizontal leads into the next room. And then she could very easily, to give the player a direction towards that next exit, place another prop that gives strong horizontal lines that lead that direction. Or you could do it with the textures on the wall. You could do it with ledges. There's a lot of different things you could do.
Yeah,
very much so.
And leading the eye is really important because you can do it, or not even leading the eye, leading a character is important, and you can do it kind of in the two ways that we're showing here. One, by just quite literally leading them with the navigable geometry that they have there. And the other is with light. If you have a hallway if you have a hallway, like a T-shaped hallway, and you're standing at the bottom of the T and then it's, goes like this. You have the hallway, you're here, and it goes like this. And you put a light on one side and keep the other side dark, character's almost surely going to go to the light side and not the dark.
This is actually going back to what we were talking about lighting and do you do the lighting. This could be a situation where Tina does do the lighting because it's part of leading the player.
100%.
For sure. I think especially in dark scenes, like I imagine this would be, with it being in a cave, light is so integral in being able to lead a player where you want them to go. Dan and I have actually done a short series called The Psychology of Environment Art. We're up to 2 parts. It could potentially continue in the future. I don't know. Well, there's so much to talk about on that topic. But we discuss how lighting is huge in guiding a player, not just in the direction that they should go, but also in invoking what kind of feeling, what kind of mood that this particular scene can have. Color is hugely important to something like that. I like that. I think I do. Let's play test it and see.
Hey, I like the floating gun. Oh, you picked it up. Nice.
Yeah, you can pick it up and you could shoot
Now you
things.
can shoot Tommy.
Now I could fight back.
Yeah, no,
All
and
right.
that's one thing that you'll find, especially because it seems like that's kind of the theme we're going right now with like a spooky chase. I'm probably gonna ruin some video games for you guys in the audience, so I apologize, but I also don't. Uh, Next time you're playing like a spooky game and you're in an area where you're in a chase scene, just notice how you're gonna go from a blue light to an orange light, and then a blue light, and then an orange light, and then a blue light, and then an orange light. And that is going to be the way that the game guides you as to where you're supposed to go, because it is going to try to draw your attention with contrast, and blue and orange are contrasty. So you might walk into, I'm going to use Outlast as an example. You might walk into a barn lit by, a torch of some sort, and then the way you're supposed to go has some nice blue moonlight in it. So then you go out into the outside, and then now you see another torch off in the distance, and so you're gonna go there and rinse and repeat. This happens in Call of Duty games. This happens in Dead Space games. It happens all the time. It is a tried and true way of guiding a player, which is good to know when you're designing your environments, because that is a very easy way to attract the player's attention.
Especially Dead Space 1 was
Yes.
huge, really used that to grand effect. I will always point to Dead Space 1, both as a fan and as a designer, as an excellent example of all of the different elements that go into creating a tension-filled environment. Level design, lighting, combat, music, all coming together to make you feel uneasy all of the time. And it's why it's my favorite out of the trilogy. It's why the trilogy is one of my favorite games that I will
They
always
made
go
a
back
third
to
one?
and replay it. Yes. we can have off camera, we can have a discussion about that.
I just had to say it. I just had to say it.
That was the remake that Motive did recently was a great example. I think they took the original levels that were in that and still live rent free in my brain, because I remembered a
Yes.
lot of it when I was playing the remake, and just accentuated all of the tension. You know, you walk into an area and it's like, if you've been a gamer as long as I have, like you walk into an area, a med bay with beds spread around at regular intervals, and air vents around on the walls, and an air vent or two on the ceiling, and where you need to go is perfectly on the other side of it. You know, as soon as you walk in there, that door is going to slam shut, and those necromorphs are going to come out of those vents.
Yeah.
But it's the way it's laid out that makes it easily read. And that's going to be something I'm going to talk about during my 30 minutes. You know, a player needs to be able to look into a level, immediately read the situation, know what direction they need to go, and know how to navigate the space. And Dead Space did that and made their spaces easy to read, but also had mood lighting using particularly red and white light. Was really big in that game, and darkness. They did it with lighting. They did it with the music. They did it with, the different vents would just occasionally like spit out steam that lingered in the environment. And I love that game.
Yeah. It's so good. It's so good. And what I like about what Tina's doing here too is this applies to so many different like environments like this way. So
I'm also gonna do a super cheap trick real quick.
I love learning super cheap tricks.
So when you have corridors that are technically next to each other, as long as there was something that broke them up, you can have the exact same obstacles but mirrored, and it'll feel different for the player to navigate, and it's less time required to get it set up and replace those assets. So
change the
cheap
lighting.
Trick for you.
Change the lighting, rotate them, maybe reorder the order of the obstacles, things like that. It could go a long way.
Yeah, like to add tension right here, for example, gonna take literally the exact same things and now just flip it around so that you as the player character, you have to kind of zigzag back and forth. So
One of the things
something
I've
to
seen
keep in mind.
designers do too when we get to this stage where we're adding props is just off to the side of the level, they have their asset zoo. You
Asset
know,
zoo.
it's the meshes that you're going to use regularly, like your barrels, your fallen beams, your stalagmites or stalactites, one of the two, or both. Um, and they're just off to the side so that you can easily make copies of them and drag them into your level.
Yeah.
Yes.
I especially like if you're going to be doing any sort of like if you're using any sort of marketplace content or anything like that, pre-built things, or if you're just on a team where that those assets are built for you and your job is to assemble them. Again, this is one of those things where whatever pipeline works for you is what works for you. Asset zoos are invaluable for me because I don't know all the tools that I have unless I know all the tools that I have. And what's the easiest way of knowing the tools you have than to see them all laid out on a bench? And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what the asset zoo is.
Just gonna add a couple extra little props here. I
We
want
got
the
about
end
three
of the
minutes.
chase scene.
A little more.
Thank you. I want the end of the chase scene to feel like really cramped and really intense. Like, am I actually gonna get out of here? I feel like I'm so close to the end, but this is as close a call as we can possibly get. So you'll notice that in the beginning, there's some obstacles, of course, some zigzagging, and then it opens up into a slightly bigger area. Um, for visual interest, and again, to really mimic that whole naturalistic thing. But the end here, I'm just going to absolutely load up with props and clutter to make it feel awful.
Yeah,
I
we got
want my players to hate this.
and which I love. Like that's perfect. We also got some very valid criticism for you, Tina, from chat. It's called gray boxing, not white boxing.
Did she
Hey,
say that? I
listen,
totally missed that.
it's just because they're white.
Because all of her stuff in the scene is the white material.
Listen, I'm colorblind, so
Oh, didn't know
you
that.
can't hold that. That has nothing to do with tone, but that's gonna be my excuse.
You know, I just wanted you to like sincerely like just mad dog the camera and go, these were white?
Can you believe that? What do you
What?
mean?
Oh, it's so embarrassing.
I can't believe that.
I really like how that like this main play space. It's fun to watch somebody's process. It's one of the reasons why I love watching speed builds is you don't really know where it's going to end up. And when you first drafted out this kind of bigger room, I was trying to break it down in my head and I was like, I wonder what you're going to do here. And it's really cool. I like it. I think that's it's not at all what I expected in the best way. Like it is a really interesting way of kind of tackling that space. And it goes to show that like kind of how you were saying is using obstacles and just regular objects and things like that. You don't have to design solely with structural pieces. My environment was mostly structural that designed that. This is not so much. This is actually much more predicated on just general obstacles and objects in a scene to kind of dictate the look, feel, and play. You had 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. 1 minute left. All right.
I think Tina's done a really great job of capturing that feeling. You
Yeah.
know, her level is smaller than yours, um, but really captured the feeling. Where yours is, you know, you started with the idea of a hotel, and you held true to that vision throughout as well. And then a lot of the stuff that she added, like the props and the whatnot, you were like, I will add those later. So this is
Yeah.
very interesting in the different approaches.
It's very interesting in different approaches, and it's a really important thing to touch on, which is no like scope appropriately, basically, is the idea. So yes, Tina has like a quote unquote smaller 10 seconds smaller scene, but look what it has allowed her to do in that time. She's been able to focus down on it much more than I was able to,
Oh my
and really
God.
instill a lot
Going
of
in the wrong
character,
direction.
which I think is really cool. Oh,
Agreed.
you pencils
Pencils
down.
down.
Yes.
All right. I managed to get the bits of ceiling that I wanted. All right, so
I
let's
also
play
want to,
through this, shall
yeah,
we?
let's play through this, and I want to point out something because we haven't seen Jessica's yet, but she did already mention, at least in the pencil drawing, that she has this. We've all kind of gone with a vista where we started in like a small place and then it opens up and then it kind of collapses back down towards the end, which I
Yeah,
find kind of interesting.
that is interesting actually. And I think it's because if you have too much of something for an extended period of time, it loses its weight. And I'll
100%.
talk about that a little bit as we go through here too. So we're starting our chase scene. We're running through. Everything is dark, scary, cramped. There's barrels in the darkness of kind of bouncing around. Come over here opens up into a larger space where arguably there's a lot to look at, which could distract you from the chase that you currently are in, which is something to keep in mind too. So running away, trying to get away from the boss, everything feels a little better for you because there's more light. It's a bigger open space. You don't feel as confined, but you're still being chased, right? So you're still running through, turn around. Oh no, we're back to yet another dark, cramped hallway.
And
This
it's
is
worse this
awful.
time.
And it's worse. Everything is way more cramped. There's tons more props. I even made it where we can't
Oh,
get out.
Oh no!
Oh no.
This
the
is why we play
importance of
test.
playtesting.
This is why
This
we
was
play
the
test.
trap. This was the trap all along. You can see the exit. The end is in sight, and you'll never get there.
See, you know what? Actually, Tina, this feels perfect for a prologue where, like, you start the game, you think you can escape, and then you die, and now you have to take on the real character for the rest of the
The
show.
actual hero, and
There
you'll
you
come
go.
across this same spot later in the game.
Oh, yes. Now that's game
Yeah.
design.
That was purposeful for sure.
Yeah.
There
But
we
yeah,
go.
that does show very much the importance of playtesting. I playtested the beginning hallway and the big room quite a bit, but deadlines. Gotta keep deadlines in mind. I didn't playtest that last hallway near as much as I should have, and now
And
here we
that's
are.
okay. That's okay because
And
The
we call
aiming
that a
frequency
happy
game
accident.
said just have
In
a
all
crouch mechanic, but
yeah.
no.
Sometimes you
Yeah.
got to work with what you have.
Yeah.
And this is what Tina was just showing off there too, is a great kind of callback too, with where, we were talking about using contrast in your lighting and things like that. But really, the idea should just be contrast. It should be contrast in your environments, in your shapes, in your scales, in your tones, in your moods. Anything that's just the same thing the whole time gets so monotonous so quickly. And that is the, there's a phrase there for it. It's like the villain of fun or something like that. It is the antithesis of fun. So, all right. Jessica, are we good?
All right, we should be good here.
All right, I got your screen up. Let's
Couple
get
of
the
notes
timer.
to start out with. I'm using my computer that I normally use at home for writing and research. So this is not a dev machine. You may be able to tell on your screen, I've changed the scalability to medium and may even go low if we need to do that. The other thing is I am using two plugins to give me some tools. The first is a blockout tools plugin that gives me these blocks that I can pull out. They're exactly 1 meter by 1 meter. But the big thing is I have this handle that I can grab that makes it easy for me to adjust the size in a short time. The other one I have is just a bundle of props that I can use, and I'll just turn on my filter for static mesh, that gives me a bunch of props. Now, these tend to be a little bit more towards like a modern looking environment. So given the time limit, I might not even use these, but these can help you figure out how you want to block in and what thing you want to use. For instance, I have some levers and some buttons that are part of this pack that make it easy to program a little bit of gameplay in there as part of doing the design. So those are the two things that I am working with. You'll see me extensively use that. And then a third thing I'm using is this right here. Since I'm using that lovely pack that just dropped. This is a traversal block. This is part of the pack, and you'll notice it just has some edges on here, and gameplay-wise, it allows me to mantle. So I am just going to have that probably off to the side. I'm also going to delete my floor. Although actually I might leave it for scale to start with and then delete it after I start making some changes to the elevation. So I got my player start. I got my thing. Oh, and Dan already started the time. Thank you for the warning, Dan.
Got you going.
I lost five. Damn it! I lost 5 seconds already.
No, here was my problem: is I wanted to let you keep going, but then I was like, does she know that she hasn't already started? So I didn't know whether to interrupt you and ask or just do it. I figured I'd let you do the intro and then we would just jump in.
I think this is foul play. That's what I think it is.
Watch this. Check it out. Restarted. All right, you're good.
Oh, there we go.
Wow. Now it's just like favoritism.
Yeah, now Tina's like, how come she got 30 more seconds?
Yeah,
unfair.
So on my grid here, each of these blocks is 50 centimeters. So I got 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters. I might go 4 meters. We'll see how that feels. It's important to kind of feel out your metrics before you start placing down things so that you know what the feeling is going to be. The other thing I like to do is I like to place a block that is more or less the size of the player. And we're going to go to about 2 meters, which is roughly where I'm going to call her Polly because she looks like a puppet. This is Polly. Polly Puppet. Bam.
Oh, I thought you were going to go because of Polygon.
Oh, see
that's where I thought you were going. About that. That's where I thought you were going with that.
Pretty close. We might actually bring it down to a little bit, but actually, no, I'm going to leave it because I can sit here and, like we talked about, obsessing about the measurements. Yeah. I can get in the weeds pretty fast. I can also, with these blockout tools, I can actually change. I can put in the box sizes, but I can also change. I think it's under blockout material. Here we go. I can actually change the color. So we'll make the player this blue. Boom. So one of the reasons why I love these tools so much. Okay. So let's do some rotation here. I like to set my grid as well as my angle snap for expediency's sake. Now, I like to start a little bit with knowing how big I'm going to make my my hallways here. So in one of the writings that I did on the Unreal developer site, I did a little bit of hashing out what the measurements that work well for Fortnite is, and I'm going to probably work with those a little bit. So a floor, if you will, is about 384 centimeters high. A corridor has to accommodate the camera has a minimum width of like 256, which you'll notice are very similar to Dan's measurements that he felt out at the beginning of his. And so I currently have my snap set to 50, so I'm actually going to go out to 250 here. Let's see here. That's about right there. Let's see how that feels.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to emphasize real quick too is that one of the things that we were trying to do with this stream is show
that does feel claustrophobic.
Yeah, is to show you all like the various different tools that you can use. I personally, I've used this blockout tool that Jessica's showing off all the time. I freaking love this tool, but it is a paid tool. So I wanted to have an option for those who like, hey, I don't have any money. I just want to get in there and know how to block out some cool things. If you don't have any spare cash to do something like that, then the geometry tools, or even just kind of blocking it out with basic geometry shapes like Tina showed off, is a really great way of doing it. There are tools out there though, like this, that make blockout processes way, I don't want to say easier, but like snappier, like a little bit more efficient than maybe with dealing with just like the basic tools that are just already on inside the engine.
Absolutely. There is something interesting that was brought up in chat here from Trazo Loco about how colors of objects can also be used to help identify what kind of object something is as well.
Absolutely. The yellow paint that that comes up every now and again in the discourse around game development, it's eye-catching, and it has been established as a standard that that denotes things that you can interact with. Red is almost always a color that denotes danger, or warm colors in general. Where cool colors are really, they more convey a sense of safety. So coloring both in your lighting and in your meshes when you're doing blackout can really be helpful.
And that's something to consider too, just in general with all design in a game, whether you're talking mechanics or level design or anything like that, is that there is a language to game design that even if you're not a designer, even if you just play games, you pick up on. We kind of talked about this in one of the previous streams before, which is like that red barrel means boom, that yellow ledge means climb, that dark hallway means go the other way. Like there is these unspoken design languages, and you can really use them and really should use them when designing, because you don't have to teach the player those sorts of languages, or at least people who are familiar with games. You don't have to always remind them and teach them about those sorts of mechanics. There are certain things that are just instilled. On the flip side of that coin, though, is new players are going to need some sort of posting or guidance or things like that until they become familiar with that language that already exists for everybody who's used to playing video games.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, so I'm just going to lay out. This is sort of my entrance room from my map right there. We may use this to introduce things. For instance, I put a traversal block in there to teach the player that, oh, if you see this type of block, that this is what you do. I'm also not worrying about verticality just yet because of time. I can go back in and add those vertical elements back in, and actually I probably will. Hopefully I have enough time to do that. But I need to do kind of like Tina did with her layout. I need to be able to lay out my general pathing first.
Yeah, the overhead view.
Exactly. That feels a little tight, so I'm gonna.
I'm loving the examples in chat for other unspoken rule.
Oh yeah,
yes.
There's
such as no enemies going the wrong way, and way too much health and ammo before a room boss fight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And let's be honest, battle arenas look like battle arenas.
Yeah. Chest high walls mean combat's coming.
Oh, I forgot that joke. Chest high walls. My very first year of teaching in public school, that was the joke.
Well, I have it with if it's any sort of horror game where like you don't have any combat and the whole point is hiding. Like if I see a locker, I know it's like it doesn't matter what game it is. It's like, all right, there's gonna be an enemy here if there's a locker here.
All right,
Absolutely.
Now we're gonna open up into the larger room that was on my map.
Very exciting. Yeah, which my brain was all over the place and I was trying to build my demo. Honestly, props to both of y'all for being able to chat as much as you have thus far while building. I struggled a lot with that, but I do kind of want to return back to the concept that I was talking about before about allowing breathing room for your players. So especially in chase scenes or corridor scenes, it is important to have breaks for your players, because if you just have the entire thing as one very tiny corridor that's filled with clutter for the entire scene, eventually it loses its impact. It no longer feels claustrophobic because your player has had the opportunity to adjust to the new dimensions that they are inside of. They've been able to adjust to the amount of clutter that they're navigating around the floor. And at that point, it goes from being a scary or adrenaline-inducing experience to something that they just have to learn. and to adapt to. And you never want to give them that opportunity. So that's why having big rooms like how Jessica is making right now gives the player a chance to have that quote unquote breathing room when technically it's not really. What it is you're giving them something else for their brain to try and catch up on. So then when they go back into a dark corridor or a tight space, it gives back that same adrenaline inducing feeling again. This is used a lot in horror games specifically and action games where it is not always combat or the big bad at all times. There will be sections where either the if it's a chase scene, we'll just keep up with that since that's what we're building for anyway, right? Very seldom is the thing that's chasing you going to be right at your heels for the entire thing. A lot of time, the enemies will also have their own obstacles where either part of the path behind you becomes unnavigatable. I don't think that's the word, but we're going to go with it anyway. Where they can't navigate it following you. So you as the player have a moment to either patch yourself up if you have healing items or take a second to look around the room that you're in, adapt to the new environment that you have rapidly been thrust into, all that kind of stuff. And then again, once you're kind of lulled into that false sense of security, that's when you'll have usually your big bad busting in through a wall or appearing out of nowhere and inducing that same feeling of, oh no, I have to run. And having spaces like this where you have that moment for your player to calm down is very important and key to level design and making sure that that works for what exactly the parameters of this moment is supposed to be. Going back to my 3 S's, that falls into the setting the scene that I was talking about before.
Yeah, and those sorts of things are really important because that's honestly what helps make a good level or a good play space is having those sorts of contrast and things like that. And it's amazing how, like, if you want a place to feel tight, like, you can make it small and that the player pawn really is kind of narrow in there. But if you want that place to feel as tight as possible, make them go from a huge open area before and vice versa. You can really sell scale. Like, if you want something to feel imposingly large, make them emerge from it from a smaller place. And that opening up will just make it feel way bigger than maybe it even really is.
Yeah, it's contrast. It's all about contrast.
I'm also using an interesting design pattern here, kind of called hourglass design. You start in a space that is small, you bottleneck, you go into a space that is large, you bottleneck. This is going to be my Y branch here, where there's going to be the dead end here, and then it's going to be going to open into a space where you can see the end. So it creates tension and safety, and tension and safety by having those spaces.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited.
That is the key to game design. And it's true in all aspects, even difficulty. Like, you don't want something that's just like imposingly difficult forever, because that gets really, like, it wears on you and it becomes very exhausting. But having that kind of peak and valley where it's like, all right, I'm doing okay, and then, oh, here's a hurdle, but I surmounted it, and here's the release. And then here's the hurdle, and I surmounted it, and then here's the release.
Yes, absolutely.
Trying to be aware of my time too as we go.
You have 17 minutes.
Yeah, you're in a
you
good
got
spot.
Plenty of time.
Plenty.
Yeah, it's you're good. You're good. You're not even halfway there. You got plenty of time. Tina, you never actually went through what your 3 S's were. Did I not? Did I just say they existed?
You did.
Well, you said the names, but you didn't elaborate further.
Oh, okay. I can do that, or I could just leave it a mystery forever. You'll never know.
It was, let's see if I was a good student here. Set the scene.
Yes.
Simplify.
Yes.
Ooh, I forgot what the last one was.
Settle.
That's right.
That's right. Yes. So
secrets. That's the 3 S's. Secrets.
Yes. So yeah,
Nailed
set
it.
the scene. make the bigger picture ideas, get your layout set, the big shapes, all that kind of stuff put in. Simplify is where, because scope creep is a thing. So simplify is, especially in gray boxing, make sure that you have the simplest, most navigatable version of your level possible without having to add in unnecessary details that are just going to bog down the whole work. Especially if something needs a ton of rework, depending on how much you threw into there, you've just made even more work for yourself for having to reorganize everything and reiterate. So find the stuff that is imperative to the gameplay that you're doing. So like the props that I added, for example, the barrels and the boards that were going across, the reason those were added is because those were the obstacles. Those were necessary for finding the pathing for the character. But if I were to do the full artistic rendition of it, then obviously there'd be other stuff like rope or all kinds of props that could be thrown in there, but those aren't necessary for this point of planning. So simplify down to what you need for your general gameplay and your general setup. And then last one is settle, which is also otherwise known as stop. Settle and stop can be used interchangeably here. Of course, you can always add something more. Of course, you can always improve on it, but that's not the point. You're here so you can build the foundations and continue making the thing and eventually releasing the thing. So at a certain point, you have to settle with what you've made, accept that this is good enough for the purposes that you need it for now. And you can always add on to it later if you have the time and scope to do so. But at some point you have to settle and realize, okay, this is enough. This is the end of this particular phase. So those are the three S's.
So I had a mentor that said the exact same thing, but the way he said it was, good art is never finished, only abandoned. And that's, yes. Level design is an art.
Yes.
Yeah. It is the unfortunate truth of anything production is that it is the finding the compromise between making the most perfect, amazing thing possible and time, which can also be considered budget. But time is money. It's the same thing. It is trying to find what can you actually do in the time frame you're allotted, whether that's because of deadline or contracts or budgets or anything like that. What is the best that you can do? And honestly, I think that's something that is probably one of the hardest things for a lot of people. I know I'm guilty of it too. Like I always have all these ambitions and things like that. And it really has been something that I've had to develop over time of like, where is that compromise? Like, where's that realistic compromise for what I can do versus what I want to do? Because it kind of sounds sad. Like I can feel that where it's like, oh well, settling sounds bad, and it's like, yeah, it kind of is, but it's also kind of the name of the game. Like you have to stop eventually. Like, if you chase perfection, you will chase until you die, and then you'll still be chasing because it's impossible.
Yeah.
Nope, I don't want to use that bit.
You have to accept that you've done what you can. You've done the best that you could with what you had. There is a question here from Twitch chat that is not necessarily related to level design, but it's kind of a lighthearted one, and I am interested in your answers. But Yumi2, if that's how you say your name, I apologize if it's not, asked, how did you get into the gaming industry? Oh no, it scrolled. Where are you? There it is. How did you get into the games industry? And how did you get inspired to work with or create games?
Well, mine was really interesting. So I always wanted to make games. I was the person in my group of friends that always found the new games, always came up with new rules for the games when the games got old.
Yeah.
And I just really genuinely enjoy seeing people have fun with the things that I create. What kind of drew me towards level design as a potential path is here I am actually designing the fun. You know, if we look here, I am actually designing the fun elements. You know, if this were related to a board game, this would be like I am designing the board, and that just happened to be what my favorite piece was. Um, how I got into the game industry was almost entirely by accident. Epic was the company that I wanted to work for when I left college. And of course, when I left college, it came out at a time when there was a transition in the industry. If I say what it was, I'm going to date myself, and I don't want to do that. But it basically made all of the stuff that I worked with in school completely obsolete.
So we had the same transition. Okay.
You and I really have to have a chat about
right.
timelines for
Okay.
things. And so actually I ended up getting into teaching because I also really enjoyed working with students and teaching people how to do exactly what we're doing right here, which is why you see me on this show so much. And so I went into teaching for 15 years. I taught high school kids primarily. And now I started talking to someone on Twitter who is now one of my coworkers. And he basically was like, hey, do you think you could do my job? And that got my foot in the door. And now I write documentation for the Unreal Engine.
Amazing.
I love hearing about everybody's journey because
Because it's never what you think.
9.5 minutes.
They're always so different.
All right, I am just going to do this floor very quickly then.
I believe in you. Yeah, just want to let you know. You have a little over 9 minutes. But
Yeah. Oh,
Dan, I
want to make my vertical elements.
Yeah. So mine's a long story. I pretty much came out of the womb with a controller in my hand. The Atari 2600 was the first thing I played back then. E.T. No, not E.T. It was actually it was Pac-Man and Pong. Those were like my big things when I grew up. So I've always had games in my life, and I've always found them a fun, fascinating, pastime. Young, it was just that. And then I started getting into modding with things like Unreal and StarCraft and stuff like that because my neighbor was super smart. His dad was in like tech and stuff like that, and they were very, very knowledgeable there. So like I kind of absorbed some of that from like osmosis. And then this like little small indie title came out called Halo. And it
small indie title.
Small little thing. You might not have heard about it.
Blew my mind. I was just like, this is like an actual step up from like pretty much since like Doom was like that step up sort of thing. It was like another one of those step ups where I'm just like, oh wow, these are actually really so darn cool. So it started as just kind of a fascination with the game and really enjoying it, and then that led me to learning about the developers and what they did, and that led me into like learning how development goes or whatever. And it was more of just like a morbid curiosity thing at that time. Like I was just kind of fascinated about it. I just wanted to learn. And then another game called Far Cry on the Xbox came out, and it had a map editor, like an actual honest to goodness map editor with terrain tools and all that fun stuff. And I was like, oh, I want to try that. And then I ended up in the map editor, and I didn't leave for an entire summer, and I did nothing but make maps over and over and over again. And they were terrible and horrible and bad. And I was like, okay, but I really love this level design thing. I'm going to revisit that mod thing. Started modding for a few years. Eventually was just like, well, this is clearly not just like a phase. Like I really do thoroughly enjoy this. And I was in construction at the time, and I really didn't want to do construction anymore. So I was like, all right, college. I'm going to college. I'm going to learn how to do this for real. And then in college, I found out that I liked teaching, which felt like a heresy thing because I did not do well in school when I was growing up. And I came to learn that it was really not so much the learning that I hated. It was how the instruction wasn't good for my brain hole.
Mm.
And so because of that, I got pretty decent at this stuff. Students stopped going to the teachers for help, and they started going to me, and I realized, oh, I really like this. But then I graduated. I was like, cool, I'm going to go out in the industry, do some stuff. Did freelance for years and years and years. And I just kept thinking, I really like that teaching thing. I just really like the teaching thing. And so then I pursued that. I was an instructor for 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And then was told about an opportunity to come and run these really cool live streams. And I was like, well, heck yeah. And now I'm here.
Now you're stuck with me again.
Yes, yes. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And right now, this is, and I told this to Tina behind the scenes a little bit. Like, this is the best of both worlds. I get to do this job and the teaching thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I love it.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's awesome. Both of your stories are amazing.
And weirdly
And
similar.
Weirdly similar.
And Tina, would you care to enlighten the class as to how you ended up where you are today?
Yes,
Sure.
I've never heard this story.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. So interestingly enough, I actually was kind of late to the game as far as video games go. I feel like most people who are in the industry played them religiously as kids, and then it just kind of followed them all the way up through into their careers. My elder brother played video games. He was really into them. But I would watch him play. I was more interested in watching video games than actually playing them myself. And so it was just kind of like TV almost for me for a long time, where it was just a form of entertainment, but it wasn't necessarily a passion of mine yet. It wasn't until Dragon Age Origins came out. That was the first game that I ever bought for myself because I wanted to play it myself. I didn't want to watch somebody else play it. I wanted to play it because it looked awesome and it hit all of the things that I loved. I'm a really big reader and it hit like all my favorite genres. It was fantasy. You got to play as a warrior or you get to join this really cool order and I loved it. So I wanted to play it for myself. It was to the point where like I I had to just kind of scrape together what money I had because as I wasn't a gamer, I was not fully aware of how expensive video games can be, especially upon initial release. So I had to bring like some change and I was pulling out just quarters and pennies from my purse and my pockets to find the last bit to cover it. And eventually the guy that was in line behind me gave me 2 dimes and that was what I needed to finish the purchase. But that was my initial foray into it. And I loved it so much that it got me started on modding, again, for Origins originally. And that just kind of turned into this deep love that I have for especially narrative games. Those are my favorite, those are my bread and butter. I ended up going to college specifically for game art because I wanted to kind of continue on through that path. Then, how I actually got into the industry, my first job wasn't games. It was actually for simulation. It was for training sims. And I learned a lot about 3D and I learned a lot of things that were helpful for me fundamentally as an artist for working in a studio and with people. But the problem is that it was realistic and that's not what I want. I'm a fantasy gal. I want to run around with a sword and I want to hit people with my shield. So I decided that I wanted to go into the actual game industry. And first it started with a couple of indie studios and I just sort of worked my way up. The more people that you meet in the game industry, the better. Those connections will lead you on to other opportunities. So make sure that you're networking with your coworkers or just other people that you respect in the industry. And eventually, led from studio to studio. I progressed through until I was an art lead eventually working on games. And then interestingly enough, I got to a point where I was burnt out on art itself. And my favorite part of my job was helping people learn and get caught up to speed on what our studio process was. So I was like, well, I wonder what it would be like to teach actually if I'm enjoying this so much. So then I took a break. I went into education. I was a teacher for a while, and then I kind of followed that same passion of loving developing stuff and creating cool things. And that brought me here as the community manager for Unreal Engine, where now I just get to spend all of my time surrounded by people who are incredible and know infinitely more than I do and are so passionate and amazing at what they do, both at Epic itself, of course, but also all of you who participate in these streams and chat with us. It's amazing. That was scary. I was like, we were going into the void.
It's sad the part of me was hoping that it would actually go.
So I have about what I wanted, and I have about 30 seconds left. But here's an example of scope, right? Dan had a good idea, and he got it in there, and had some idea of props and had started working on it. Tina's scope was smaller, and she was able to put a lot of props in there, so it feels more like a finished level. And here's mine, where I have some verticality, and I have like that space up there is also what we call a valve. Once you jump down from there, you can't go backwards. And so maybe that's where the chase starts in earnest. But I don't have as much in the way of props. My brain goes, if I just had 20 minutes more.
I know, right? It's always like, just a little more.
I do want to point out though something, and this is a good lesson as a takeaway from this, is you don't always, you may either overestimate or underestimate how much time you need to do something. Even though there are countless things that I would have liked to have changed about mine, I'm sure there was countless things that Jessica and Tina would love to have changed about theirs too. We still largely got it done, even in that really crazy time limit.
Well, and here's an example of scope as well. Normally, my design called for 3 paths at the end. I did not have time for 3 paths.
Yeah.
So the minimum that is needed to get through this area is 1 path. So that's what I went with.
Yep. And that's also an important lesson, is knowing when to make the cuts that you need, because that's something that is unfortunate will happen in the industry. Anybody who's in there knows now, anybody who's going into there, things will get cut. Complete things will get cut. Finished levels won't make it in because maybe narrative couldn't get it in time, or there was a problem with game design or the AI that was making it not work, but the arted level was there and was no longer in the game or anymore because of it. Things get cut. It's really a balance of trying to what you can do and what you have time to do. And that's one of the things that we wanted to stress with doing this blockout size, is that this really shouldn't take you too long. Your first blockouts will take you a little while. Anything you do for the first time is going to take you a little while, but practices like this can actually be a really good tool to kind of help you kind of work out all that rust, so that way you can actually be fairly proficient, even when you're not on a 30-minute timer.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk through this a little bit, because like I feel like this is Dan is one end of the spectrum, Tina is the other, and I'm like right in the middle.
Our anchor.
Exactly. So I do have some gameplay in there. I did start to put some leading elements in here, and I did stick pretty close to that hourglass gameplay technique. You know, we open wide a little bit. I introduced the idea of, here are these climbable blocks. Oh, my computer's struggling a little bit.
That's all right.
You know what, though? I might leave that there, too.
That's an obstacle.
It is.
So we have a vista where you walk up here, and probably what I would do is actually put some clutter or a doorway in here to slow the player down so that they can actually look. Now, maybe at this point, the player hears the roar of the monster that is chasing them, and they run, they drop down. Now they can't go back. So it gives you this tension that, oh crap, you know, anything left up there is gone.
I have to move on. Yeah.
Yep. The monster is chasing you. This is going to be your multiple paths, multiple options place. I'm probably going to use light and leading lines to lead you through this cavern. And then, just like we had in the original design, and this is a good point too, I didn't care about Z fighting or overlapping elements. I'm just trying to get the rough idea in there. Clearly, when we make these pieces, when the art folks make these pieces, it's going to matter. And, maybe I put a pile of rubble here. It's amazing in your games, if you look under some of the props, what it hides.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. They just add a little rubbish pile here. No one will.
Here's the choice point right here. I could, do a little bit to trick the player to go, oh, maybe if I go this way, oh no, now I have to face the monster for a moment, juke around them, and now I'm at the point where I can see the end. I did have the idea for 3 paths that gave you 3 different ways to play it, and I'll probably put that back in. But for time, I made just the one, and you're being chased, and maybe the monster sprouts wings and is flying towards you. And maybe here's the beginning of a boss fight. This might actually be a good place to start a boss fight.
Oh, to turn into an arena.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
actually, that just gave me a really great idea, because that first open area that you went through actually kind of has an arena feel to it. What if you were running, and then at the end of this, you get like the sword or something, and then you get to chase the monster back into the arena, and then...
Or maybe even here, back there is where the monster loses you for a second. They have to go through another tunnel to get, and you have to fight some enemies there before the chase picks up again.
The predator becomes the prey.
I love that.
And that's a really great example of like having the design, or the level actually also be part of the game mechanical design too.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Everything is interlinked.
The goal I really try to have when I'm building these levels, again, is just I'm supporting the gameplay. I'm communicating to the player, this is how you play the game. These are the mechanics that you have that are at your disposal. And then right here, maybe we have a test of those things. What did you learn in the first part? And now you're going to be tested on them. Same thing over here. Maybe over here, one of the 3 paths is a jumping puzzle, and being able to figure out how to use those mantling blocks to get to the other end quickly.
Yeah. This is great.
This was amazing.
Good job, everyone.
Yeah. Well done, you two. 30 minutes is no joke. And you both made some really compelling, fun-looking levels that I would both love and hate to have to run through while being chased by something.
Tina, you were also here too, and you also did a great job.
Oh, yes. Shucks. Thank you.
As a designer, I would take any one of those designs, any one of those 3 designs, and continue working with it.
Yes. They were all lots of fun. There is one question that I want to pose to the both of you that I've seen come up a couple times. But people are curious. So we've made the gray boxing, we've done the design. What for you would be the next step with these levels of yours?
Placing all of the leaves on the ground.
Individually, placing each leaf.
That's definitely not a real scenario that has happened to me before in my time. Listen, I love the details. That's one of my problems, is I love the details. So if I get a chance to go into the details, I will. And I have done that where I blocked it out and I'm like, cool, and this area has a broken thing, so little pieces of rubble. I'm going to start with that instead of actually doing everything else important. No. For me, it's I usually work large to small. So if I have the scene gray boxed out, I'm gonna start going, okay, like what are my modular assets? What are the main things I need? All right, I'm gonna get the walls that I'm gonna need, I'm gonna get the floors that I'm gonna need, I'm gonna get the stairs, those sorts of things. And then once I have those all in there, it's like, okay, cool. Now we can start working on props like chairs and tables and light fixtures and all that stuff, and just kind of work large, medium, and then small. Usually the way that I go, I do often get distracted though still. I'll be honest.
That's okay.
For me, it would be, I would refine the design further. I had to cut some corners for that if I had more time now. So maybe I got some feedback from my lead on that, and I would take that feedback, refine the design, make sure that it has the feel that I want, add the props in, of course, that I didn't have time for at the time, and get it in front of players. Let's not worry about the art yet, but get it in front of players, have them play it. See if they're picking up on the nuances and the way that I want them to play. Mm-hmm. And then the next step is going into there and saying, okay, those big spaces, what kind of rooms are those? Are those storage rooms? Are the monsters like, like, is it an alien hive where their victims are in there? Is it an old mine, and this is where the miners had stored their equipment? Are they man-made holes versus are they made by nature versus are they made by creatures? Um, I'd figure out what the purpose of each of my spaces is and start to tell a little bit of a story in each of those spaces. Making sure, again, to make sure that I'm supporting the gameplay as I go.
Yeah.
I want to echo that. I completely jumped the gun. I
No,
went under
too
the
late.
assumption that we were done
Story,
with the blackout
Dan,
phase.
story.
Can't take it back. It's too late.
It's a great point. I just want to echo that. Yeah, I was jumping to like assuming the blackout phase was done. No, from literally from what that was, yeah, I would have refined the heck out of it, play tested, pretty much everything that Jessica just said.
And the big thing too is, and this is, designers don't often think about this, especially indie designers. Don't have just you play it. Don't have just your designer buddies play it. Yeah. You need to get it in front of real players. And even better, if you have someone in your family, the way I always put it to my students was, get your mom to play it. Someone who is not a gamer, someone who does not normally seek out those experiences. And if your mom can figure out how to navigate that level and get that feeling of tension, you've done it right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Get it in front of a wide range of people.
Yes.
Avid gamers, casual gamers, and complete newbies.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But don't just market your stuff to designers. Like, don't just show your designer friends.
We have a whole stream about that.
Yes. That was such a great stream, too. I watched it just the other day.
Yeah. I wouldn't do anything with mine because it's perfect exactly the way that it is.
It's pristine white box stage.
There's nothing else that needs to be done with it, especially not being able to actually end the level. It's perfect the way that it is.
That was just a happy accident, and you die there. That's what happened.
You think you get out and you don't, and that's it.
That's an important thing to say, though. Like, happy accidents happen all the times. Bugs become features, accidental design decisions become poor mechanics. Like, that is a very natural part of that process.
So there's a particular game out there that I won't mention, but the whole point of it was done. It was done during a game jam, an internal game jam at that particular developer, and the whole point of it is that as long as a bug wasn't game breaking, it's a feature, not a flaw.
Yes.
As long as it didn't crash the game. And this particular game has gone on to have 3 iterations. So that design actually worked. Happy accidents do indeed happen, and it's important to be on the lookout for them.
100%.
It's a feature, not a bug. Absolutely.
be adaptable. Like sometimes you might get an idea in your head and you're just like, no, it has to be this. But if you find that while you're developing it, that a different route is going to be better, pivot. If you can. Yep. If your director says you can't, then don't. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, y'all, we did it. We did the thing. It was lots of good fun.
I had a quick question to go before we do the final one that we always do. Is there anything? Wow, because I've had this feeling many times before, so I want to put it out there. Is there anything that happened while you were demoing that you wanted to touch on that you didn't because you were distracted or you were talking about something else? Is there any stones left unturned that you feel like are important tips and tricks?
Oh wow, prop placement, leading lines. Although we touched on that briefly, designing areas for combat. So many things that could have been in there that we just didn't have time for. And even like the importance of verticality in your designs and that kind of thing. There were so many things that we touched on very briefly that I would love to do a whole deep dive on.
Yeah.
So you just have to come back and we'll do a part 2 of this.
Oh darn!
This will be the
no.
This will be the kind of like intro into it where we're just kind of generalized stuff, and then maybe next time we'll actually have a little more focus. Because, like she said, there's a million little topics that you could go super in depth on that are really important and very important to consider as you go through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure I do have things that I'll remember at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, but for now, I feel pretty content.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think we
there's
meet all the goals we set out to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think exactly that we had there's more things that we could definitely deep dive into that I think we should. The last thing that I'll just say is like, don't forget to have fun with it. Like this is supposed to be fun. Like it can be very intimidating, especially I've been there where it's like I have either a deadline or an idea, and I'm not executing on either of them well, and that is the easiest way to make it feel horrible and where you stop having fun. Take a deep breath. You maybe even take a step back from it for a minute. Some people say this as a joke, but I actually don't. Like maybe play a game that you like, that you're inspired by, or that is similar, or look at other artists that are also doing some similar stuff, because sometimes you can just get yourself in a rut, and then the more that you panic, the more you dig yourself into the rut. And just taking that step out, take a step back, remember what it is that you like in these sorts of environments and these sorts of levels and things like that. Take stock and then revisit, and don't be afraid to delete stuff if you need to. You don't have to get stuck. That's a big
Yes.
lesson that took me a long time to learn, is that it is okay to throw work away. Like
Delete
that's
things,
fine.
Dan. Do
It
it.
is.
Delete them. All
I'm actually
right.
going to sleep on this design and go and then take it a little further probably next week. Gonna be cool.
Please do. That would be so cool. And also, if anybody took me up on my offer earlier, if anyone was also designing stuff right alongside us while this was going on, I don't know if we can throw our social handles up real quick, Dan, but screenshot and tag us. I want to see it. I think it
I
would be
want to see
cool.
it.
Let us know if you do. It would be really, really cool. And if you
Yeah.
haven't, or you're maybe if you're watching this as a video later, do it over the weekend or something and tag us in it. It would be awesome. I would love to see y'all's take on a prompt like this and see what you come up with. And I think it could be really fun.
And just a
I love it
general
when
tip.
people show me their work, show me their. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, no, go ahead.
I love I love it when people show me their work. I love it when people ask me questions. So don't be afraid to hit me up on the site formerly known as Twitter.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And
exactly.
just a general tip, especially if you're new to this, to game development or level design or whatever it is that you do, this is something that I really recommend doing, because it's something I wish that I would have done more of, is at least take photos of your work. But if you can, save the projects, even if you hate them, because it's really difficult when you're just living in your head 24/7 day by day to notice the improvements until you go back like 6 months and see what you were working on before, and then go, oh no, that was really bad. Like what I'm doing right now is kind of okay. Like actually, like being able to see that progress is it's really important, because otherwise you might feel like you're stagnating and not really know how much you've actually improved. And sometimes just being able to see that visual reminder of like, no, I am progressing, can be huge.
Mhm.
Totally not where I thought you were going with that.
uh,
All right. Well, I have the final question for both of you that I ask all of my guests every week. You've also had to answer it before, so I require a new answer from you. But out of all of your experience thus far, and especially out of the things that you got to share today, if you had to condense it all down into one piece of advice for those watching, what would it be?
Oh,
It never gets
one.
easier.
Dan, if you have one, go, man.
uh I'm starting to regret doing this, because every time I do it, somebody says something way better than me the next time. Like, that's the thing I should have said. I mean, honestly, I'll just speak from my own personal experience, is do not be afraid to fail. Even though it's really scary, and as someone who is still also afraid of it, like, okay, you can be afraid to fail, but don't let it impede you. Because really, at least for me, the biggest, like, learning all the tools, learning all the tips, analyzing my favorite games, listening to GDC talks, reading books, talking to professionals, all of that stuff, they all have great tips. But at the end of the day, my biggest hurdle was me, and getting in there and having the courage to just make the steps and make mistakes and figure out why they weren't working and learn from them so that I could not do that next time, and repeating that process over and over and over and over again for an unbearably long time before I was finally at to the point where I'm like, well, these are actually kind of turning out pretty good. Like, actually, my first map wasn't very good. I'll tell you what it was. It was in Far Cry. It was a U-shaped island with 2 bases on it and an ocean in the middle. And what was you going to do? Drive around it or swim? I didn't even put in boats. Like, there was nothing. It was the worst, most horrible. I put in 2 crates, I remember, because I wanted to block the exit of one of the doors. And that was my first map. It was awful. But then my next one was a little bit better. And then the next one was a little bit better. And the next one was a little bit better. And you have to have the permission from yourself to go in there and work out all those kinks, because they're the biggest barrier. At least they were for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Mine is going to be similar to Dan, but also to build off Dan sharing his first map, I will also share my first map. I had a mentor early in my college career that left. And for his going away party, I made him a level in the version of Unreal that it was out at that time. It was a 2-story box. But this 2-story box had each stairwell in the has a stairwell in the corner. It had a lot of verticality. There's a lot of things I liked about it. Banners with his face on it. Was 64 players in a tiny space. And if you remember in Unreal Tournament, the Redeemer, it basically had a nuclear weapon hidden in the center. It was fun only because it was chaotic.
Yeah.
And I look back on that fondly because I had 60 people playing that, and hearing these people die and laugh and have such a great time is really what solidified me wanting to work in games. To take all of my experience and all of it and condense it down into advice. You have to get past yourself and do. You know, not only have I learned in my time how to teach and how to write, you know, because I write Unreal documentation now, and how to make games. All of those things I have gone through and stuck at in the beginning. Give yourself the grace to fail, forgive yourself, and learn from each of those mistakes. But as Dan said, you can read the things, you can watch these live streams, you can listen to all the advice from a bunch of different people on YouTube and in forums. But if you don't apply that advice and build things and let people see those things, you are never going to progress. The only difference between me and you is years of experience.
That's 100%. You are the conduit for all of your knowledge, but it still has to go through you. And you have to let yourself work out those kinks.
You have to use that knowledge so it becomes muscle memory, is what my lead often talks about. And there are some things that I am still developing the muscle memory for.
And I argue that if you ever feel like you've stopped learning, that you have now failed.
Yes,
like you'll
never stop learning.
Like, always improve.
We'll add some new features to the engine.
I am a master at this. I can't get any better. That's a scary kind of person, and that person will immediately stagnate and plateau, and you will surpass them instantly.
Now, because you participated, Tina, I would pose the same question.
Oh no!
You have no choice this time. Actually,
cut the stream. Cut it right now. No.
Dan's not gonna let that happen.
I think for me, oh, dang it. I should have foreseen this.
Gotcha.
Play games. Like, take the time to play games that have come out that you're interested in, and learn from them too. because especially when it comes to like the stuff that we did today, the level that I designed, I drew a lot of inspiration, like I said, while I was making it from other games that I really have enjoyed playing. And if I liked it, then of course I'm going to want to make more of those things happen and exist. So it's important to learn, it's important to work hard, but it's also important to take the time to remind yourself why you're doing this in the first place. Make sure you keep that passion alive and burning inside of you, and take the time to play a game. And you don't have to just look at it from a learning perspective as well. You can also just play a game to play a game because it's fun and you want to do that. And if you need the verbal permission from a random person on the internet, I give you permission to take some time for yourself and play a game because you just want to play the game. And that's my advice to you.
I have two things. One, I want to echo off that. I'll bounce off that real quick. I also have to read this from chat. Thank you for the wisdom, Tina.
Wow.
That was Faye Flex.
I don't think they even necessarily meant it like that, but you said it like that.
I am going to wager that that is what that is what they meant. No, to just echo Tina's thing real quick is like, all these tools are great. Knowledge, like live streams, GDCs, things like that. They are all great ways of learning, you know, what works and what doesn't. But Tina's kind of right. The best tools that you can use, and something that'll probably influence you more than anything else, is what are the games that you like? What are the games that you don't like? What about those don't you like? What about these do you like? Do you have a favorite level? Why? Look at it. Why is it your favorite level? That could teach you way more than GDC talk or you know, a chapter of a book can, because that is all everything in practice right then and there. And if you can look at that and break it down, then you'll start to learn what you like, what works, and what doesn't. And that can be a huge tool. And it's also just fun. Stress relief is great.
Yes. 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 All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to be here today and doing this crazy experiment with me. It was a lot of fun. I also learned so much from both of you and watching how you work. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, genuinely.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I love doing these, and I'm always happy to come back.
Well, we're happy to have you anytime you want to be here. And I've already kind of just planned out we're going to have a part 2 of this at some point anyway. And it was basically a verbal handshake and you can't get out of it. So,
and also thanks everybody for watching and sticking around for this extra long video. This has been a massive stream, and we're glad you stuck around for it.
Yeah. Thank you for your suggestions. Thank you for your prompts. A lot of those were awesome, and I think y'all should actually make them because they were great. So make sure you do that and then tag us so
I'm not gonna lie, if you do. I really think I might take one of those other 2 prompts and work on something later.
They were great. All of them were great.
They were really good.
But yeah, with that, one final thank you to our wonderful guest today. One final thank you to everyone who is watching the show today. It wouldn't be what it is without you, your participation, and you being here and willing to learn and hanging out with us. So thank you for taking the time to be here. If anybody is watching that missed part of the stream, don't worry. We post all of our streams in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube channel. So you can go back to it, watch it at your leisure if you missed any part of it. If you want to keep up to date on news and the latest things that are happening as far as Unreal Engine goes, you can do so by following us on all of our socials at Unreal Engine. And if you haven't already, you should come and join us on the Epic Developer Community, which is dev.epicgames.com/community. But there's other stuff too, but /community is my personal favorite.
Like documentation.
Yes, like documentation. There's all sorts of things there. We have forums, we have tutorials, we have all of the documentation, we have so many things there to assist you in your development journey. So if you haven't already, go check it out, join it. It's a great time. I promise. I feel like the more I insist on it every time, it sounds like it's not, but it is. So do that. But yeah, with that, we'll wrap it up for here today, and we'll see y'all next week.
Finger
Bye, everybody.
And one final thank you
Finger
for the
guns out.
wonderful host, Tina.
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
all right. Now I have to awkward finger gun out of here.
Finger gun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.